Let me emphasize, I don't mean that it's generating a woman in every image. I mean literally the same woman, every time in every picture. I'll start by apologizing. I would include photos as I'm sure it would help diagnose the issue better, and I'm no writer. However, after having 3 X posts deleted, 1 post each in the ChatGPT, Midjourney, and similar subreddits, and a Snapchat, I'll get to that one later, it's become clear to me that whatever unusual virus that my devices have all somehow contracted does not allow for me to share images of it. It's like this problem is unique to me or something, and every attempt to share any picture containing the woman results in the same thing: failure or immediate deletion. Super inconvenient, I know, but I'll do my best to describe the issue. And before you bother spamming my comment section with every word for liar in the dictionary, I'm not saying that you have to believe me. I'm asking those of you who do to help me keep my job and sanity, both of which I feel precariously close to losing each day this phenomenon persists. Monday, I was polishing up images for the college's fall enrollment campaign, removing background clutter, dropping in the logo, the usual. The deadline was Tuesday. My creative director had already emailed twice, and I was doing what I always do under pressure, which is procrastinate harder. So by the time that I opened up the image generator, it was nearly 11 p.m. Now, I'm not the sort to lean on AI for everything, but I've never had a real problem with it until all this, and the job needed doing. The prompt was literally nothing. Mundane as anything I've ever written. Edit this photo of a diverse group of students on campus. Adjust for warm lighting, aspirational. Include the following logos and text. Your future begins here. The kind of thing that I've generated 100 times. She was in the first output. I didn't clock it immediately. I was tired and scanning mostly for the usual problems. Fused fingers, a bad teeth with that weird smudged quality. That glazed expression that AI gives people that makes them look freshly concussed. I picked the second image in the grid, cropped it, and was halfway to sending it in when something caught my eye. There was a grayish blot in the top right, tucked between 2 of the students. That was all it was at first. Just a little wedge of dead color where the background should have been all warm and green. I zoomed in expecting one of those uncanny, almost faces that these programs sometimes invent in crowds, and found something close enough to justify being annoyed. A strip of something dark and stringy, hair maybe, and a pale curve beside it that might have been skin. Mostly it just made the image unstable. So I fed the picture back in with a prompt. I removed the partial figure behind the woman in the 3rd row, second from the right. The gray artifact and dark hair shaped section. Only use students from the original image, and brighten the logo. Sent. And the second batch came back with the same blot. Same corner. Same place between the same 2 students. Only now the gray had edges. The dark strip had separated into something more like hair, and the pale curve had settled into the suggestion of a cheek. One small shadow sat where an eye might have been, though it was buried so deeply between shoulders and lanyards that I had to lean toward the screen to be sure that I was seeing it at all. It was irritating and more than a little ugly, but otherwise unremarkable, so far as AI mess-ups go. So I fed the picture back in. I removed the partial figure behind the woman in the 3rd row, second from the right. A section of hair and part of a face. Only use students from the original image. Brighten the logo. Send. Yet she was in the 3rd batch too. It was a woman, I could see that much now. She lingered in the same side of the frame, half obscured by another student. But it was her. I knew it from the placement first and then the color. that drained, grayish cast, like the color of still water. Her chin had more shape now, jutting almost at a knife point. Her nose sat wrong, not deformed, not exactly, but assembled badly. Like the program had been given the idea of a face, and only gotten halfway through building one and elected for another entirely. The rest of the image had degraded around her. Brenna, a recent graduate and a girl that I had spoken to once or twice, had gone murky before her. Her face smudged like a thumb had dragged across it before the ink could dry, and scattered her features haphazardly. I scoffed, closed the tab, and I opened up an older model, more dependable. The familiar dark interface loaded. I pasted the caption, uploaded the photos, and waited. And drafting apologetic Teams messages to the higher-ups while the icon spun. After a minute, it finished. And there she was. Not the blot, nor the half-face, but a woman or something close. The image was standard enough at first glance. All the unusual inaccuracies from a weaker model present. Too much shine on the teeth, vague blurring and nonsense words on the background. Except that off-center behind Brenna, the gray patch had finally resolved into something like a person. I could see the top half of her now. She was leaning around Brenna, not accidentally caught there, not blended into the crowd, but almost angled with a purpose that made the whole image feel staged around her. Her skin wasn't pale so much as utterly colorless, a gray that seemed natural only for dead things. Her hair caught the light wrong, hanging in thick black ropes that made it seem wet against a grained scalp. She was too tall for the students around her, stooped as though something in her spine wouldn't let her stand straight. The longer I looked, the more uneasy details seemed to leap forth at me. On the left side of her face, one eye sat above another, two where there should have been one, the lower beady and almost bird-like. The right side had a single eye set slightly too low. Her arms were wrapped around Brenna in a way that made it look as though she was almost drawing her in. A thumb grew from the gray flesh of her right forearm. One hand had too many fingers, the other had not enough. Brenna was barely there at all, her form descending into digital mock, a blend of incongruous features and expressions that seemed more fit for a dolly painting. And the woman, she was leaning around Brenna, or the digital massacre of her anyways, as if it to be seen, or to see me. The thought arrived unbidden, and stupid as it was, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, my skin crawling with that specific creeping certainty that someone is behind you, and has been for a while. That thing that tells you that if you look over your shoulder just now, you'll find someone or something lurking. Something that had managed to subvert your senses into the moment that realization dawned a second too late. My head snapped around. Only my open bedroom door and a room badly in need of cleaning greeted me. I sighed, silently cursed myself, and I went back to the image. Why did you add the woman? Nothing in the prompt had called for her, and you've also blurred out the actual student. What is wrong with you? A work had faded to the background of my mind. I watched the typing indicator pulse, my eyes dragging back to her against my will. Her gaze followed me. I tested it, leaning left and then right, and I could have sworn. The page jolted as the response loaded, and I nearly came out of my chair. Oh, you're absolutely right, and I do apologize for the confusion. I've gone ahead and regenerated the image with the background fully cleared, and all student faces sharpened for clarity. Let me know if this looks any better. It did not look better. She was even closer, and Brenna was all but gone. A few colors suspended in mist where a girl used to be. The woman standing in her place with the stillness of a corpse. Heat climbed up my neck. Fear with a fast, stupid anger. and under it that seed I had been refusing to name since the first output, spreading now like ink in water. Are you messing with me? Do you not see the woman? And genuinely, what is this? I knew the tone was idiotic even as I sent it. I was screaming at a glorified calculator, but the unease had worn my temper to nothing, and it was starting to feel like a sick practical joke that I was too tech-illiterate to be in on. I waited. The reply came after a moment. No problem at all. I can confirm the image contains only the students from your source photo, with no additional figures present. Occasionally, a face may render with distortion. This is an artifact of the upscaling process. I would suggest regenerating at a lower stylization value. Would you like me to do so? No additional figures. I read it 3 times. She was right there, practically dominating the frame. It felt like close enough now that I could have described the varied texture of her scalp. And yet the thing was telling me politely that there was nothing to be seen. I should have closed the laptop, dismissed it as a one-off, freak incident, and accepted the consequences of getting it done the old-fashioned way and a bit late. But instead, I did the thing you do at midnight when something refuses to make sense, my brain feeling muddled by the time and irritation. I kept on poking it. And describe everyone in the image to me. I typed, one by one. It answered almost immediately. Of course. Front row, a young man mid-laugh in a university hoodie. Beside him, 2 students sharing a phone. Behind them, a young woman in a green lanyard, smiling at the camera. To her left. It went on like that. 6 students, it named all 6 and it placed all 6. And the one in the green lanyard smiling at the camera was Brenna. Brenna, who on my screen had no face at all. Who was a smear of frost where a girl used to be. The machine was describing a photo that didn't exist. It described an image where everybody was fine. It never mentioned the woman at all. Not once. And I realized, so far as it was concerned, she simply wasn't there to mention. I scrolled to the source image on my drive, the real one, the one that I had taken myself at last spring's open day. Sun and lanyards and a banner that nobody had bothered to iron. I'm not sure why I did it in that moment. I think somehow I desperately needed to confirm the reality of the damn thing to myself. And yet Brenna was gone in that one too now. The original, the photograph that had been sitting untouched in a folder on my laptop for 3 weeks. It was as altered as one that had been generated, and lurking center frame as though she had always been there, and it was audacious a thought to even question her presence. Was that impossible woman? I stared at my screen, nearly slack-jawed, my eyes watering as a nauseating heat blossomed in my gut. It was like whatever this was had reached back through the screen and pressed its thumb to it. I closed the laptop, my hands almost deciding for me. And that's about when I heard the front door, and every animal part of me flared up at once. I was on my feet with my heart thrumming in my throat before I could think clearly, standing in the dark of my room as I listened to footsteps cross the kitchen. And then I heard keys hit the bowl by the door, and Daniel thumping down the stairs to meet my girlfriend, yowling the way that he always does when one of us arrives, as though he's been abandoned for centuries, and Cass's voice going soft and silly in a way that it always does when she talks to the cat like a child. "Why is it so dark in here, weirdo?" She called from down the hall. "You alive?" She came up still in her work polo, smelling like the inside of the restaurant, and took one look at me and stopped in the doorway. Cass closes 4 nights a week at an upscale restaurant in the city, dealing with all sorts of uptight old money folk, and she can read a room before she's all the way through the door. It's the only useful thing the job's ever given her, she says. Okay, she said. What? It's nothing, the deadline thing. This program's been glitching all night. You look like you saw a ghost. Well, nice to see you too, babe, I greeted her. Actually, come here for a second and look at this. Tell me that I'm not crazy. I opened the laptop and turned it toward her. She leaned in, squinting, her head tilting just a bit. I watched her eyes land on the woman. Ugh, she pulled back, nose wrinkled like she smelled something gross. Oh, that's grim. AI is so cursed. I don't even know why they let you use it for work. Yeah, sure, but Cass, look at her face, the eyes. This is like the third time that I've seen that woman in different generations. Is that not weird? I'm looking and yeah, that's odd. But I don't know, it sounds like it's a glitch, babe. This AI stuff is stupid. They get weird on the little details and you get like melted people stuff. She was already turning toward the bathroom, peeling off her work shirt. Just do it the old-fashioned way. Or tell your boss to use a stock photo like a normal person and stop worrying my girlfriend half to death. I sighed. She looked right at it. The stacked eyes, the wet hair, and treated it like it was nothing. I tried to let the thought comfort me, tried to treat it as confirmation that perhaps I was overthinking something that didn't deserve a second thought, and I let her steer me to bed. It was a couple of hours later that she had one of her night terrors. Cassie's had them the whole time that I've known her. 4 or maybe 5 times a year, she'll sit bolt straight with her eyes open and say something flat and uncertain into the darkness. And in the morning, she won't remember a second of it. That night, it was something about the back door being open. I put a hand on her back and told her that she was dreaming and to lie down, and she did, the way that she always does. I lay there a long time after, watching the fan throw spider-leg-shaped shadows on the ceiling. The woman waiting behind my eyes every time that I closed them, lurching in through an open back door. In the morning, I opened the laptop and ran the prompt one more time. Even now, I'm not certain why. I think some part of me believed it all to have been too strange a thing to persist. And yet, Brenna was gone this time, and in her place stood the woman facing front. All 3 eyes open, and in them was an expression that made something crawl up the back of my throat and stay there. I slammed the laptop shut. That was the last time that I opened anything AI. I didn't have a theory and I didn't want to look again. Didn't even want to think about it. My reprieve was short-lived. I went into the office that day because being alone with the laptop felt suddenly worse than being around people. Around 11, Yasmin from admission stopped at my desk, leaning over the cubicle like some bird of prey, and asked if I had heard the news. No, what news? I asked, though even as the words left me, my stomach was already turning. Oh, about Brenna, she said. She had collapsed Monday night, Yasmin told me. At home and without a warning, she had just dropped. The school only found out after she had racked up a couple of absences and somebody called and got a hold of her boyfriend. He was reluctant to share, it seemed, but from what he had given, the hospital was running tests and finding absolutely nothing. Brenna had gone pale and complained about feeling sluggish, and then she had collapsed and just hadn't woken up. I spent the rest of the day finding what little there was. A post from her mother asking for prayers, complaining that all she had been given was a laundry list of medical words that all seemed to mean the doctors had no idea what was wrong with their baby girl. And it had happened on Monday night. Monday night, while I sat at my kitchen table watching an artifact of a human drag her face into wet ink. I didn't say any of that to Yasmin, of course. There's no version of it that doesn't end with me being measured for a straitjacket. I made the expected sounds you make when somebody shares such news, muttering something about prayers, and she moved on to deliver the black gossip to the next coworker she spotted. I sat very still, worked the farthest thing from my mind as a connection I didn't want to see fought to be formed in my head. Fingers working absently at the keys as I typed and deleted without purpose. I tried to let myself forget and I failed. Cass watched over me at dinner that night, asking what was wrong. Work was all that I offered, and she frowned into her food but relented. That night, I didn't fall asleep until late, and I awoke what felt like mere minutes later, though I knew it had been longer, drenched in sweat, heart throbbing and feeling weak with a fear that I couldn't place, as my eyes darted about the blackness of our room. I sat up, searching the darkness before my eyes settled on Cass, chest aching from the pounding within, as I placed a hand on her arm to comfort myself. I remained like that for several minutes, just watching the darkness and racking my brain for whatever horrors had assailed me out of my restless sleep, until it was clear the panic wasn't subsiding naturally, and I made for the bathroom to wash my face. I flicked on the bathroom lights, shutting the door to avoid waking up Cass, and I almost didn't recognize myself in the mirror. The bags around my eyes had gone dark, and they looked watery and red. I sighed, running the tap as cold as it went, and bent over the sink. The hiss of it filled the small room, bouncing off the tile of the bowl, filled my ears, and drowned out the house and whatever nightmares still danced at the edge of consciousness and just beyond recollection and the week itself, until here was nothing left but the rush of water in the dark behind my own eyelids. I cupped my hands and brought it to my face, and the cold was a small, clean shock, the only honest thing that I had felt in days. I did it again and again. Each time the water closed over the sound of everything else, and I let it, grateful to be somewhere a thought couldn't reach me. I stayed there for several seconds, eyes shut against my palms, disappearing into the moment, the feeling of the water, the sound of it crackling against the bowl. I heaved in a breath and felt as though I had exhaled all the world's sufferings. There was a familiar squeak, the sound of the faucet turning. And then silence. I felt something lurch where an instant before there had been a fragile solitude. My eyes opened and I choked on a scream as I saw what was coming just behind me in the mirror. She was crouched, nearly draped about me like a mother around her child. Arms like tree branches shot out as hands that stretched like something from a funhouse mirror, with innumerable fingers that almost blended together, twisted and bending in impossible, excruciating fashions sought to clasp shut about my skull. I saw her then, almost all of her, behind me in the mirror. Her mouth was twisted in a smile that looked painted across a misshapen skull. Her body almost picturesque in a twisted sort of way, like somebody had taken the idea of a model and stretched it into a horrid, drab parody of the concept. I spun, swinging my hand blindly as I shrank away from her clutches, waiting to feel her iron grasp close around my skull. I pressed my eyes shut against all logic, my mind refusing to confront what I knew was before me as I scrambled back, losing my footing on the corner of the bath mat and hitting the ground with a thud. I lurched back as I felt a hand wrap around my shoulder. "Hey, babe!" Cass's voice was strung thin with panic. I opened my eyes, hardly knowing when I had even shut them, glancing up to see my girlfriend kneeling before me. She wore an expression of worry that made my gut turn, my eyes darting about the bathroom, then the room behind her, finding nothing. I was on the ground, knees curled up to my chest. I wasn't certain how I had gotten there or for how long, and my throat felt raw. I had been screaming, I realized. "What is going on with you?" she asked, and the desperation in her voice broke something in me as I fell, sobbing into her shoulder. I didn't tell her everything, of course, just that someone from work had passed and that it was really weighing on me. It was true, but not true enough. And as we went to bed, her arms wrapped around me. I felt an emptiness that made the room feel cold, and my eyes never once left the bathroom. I went back to work the next day. I refused to be home alone after whatever had happened to me that night, and though I was coming to accept it as some waking nightmare brought on by a lack of sleep and an abundance of stress, somehow it still wasn't enough to make me feel safe alone. All anybody could talk about at work was Brenna. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that it was a coincidence. I'm good at telling myself things, I've come to realize. It held until Thursday night. I got home before Cass did. The house was dark and quiet and the laptop stayed shut, and for the first time in 2 days I felt almost okay, save for the moments at work when conversation turned to Brenna, or I pressed my searches into her condition, which all proved unpromising. Cass came in around 11, exhausted, and went straight to bed. And a while later I followed and laid down next to her and watched her sleep. She looked so completely and ordinarily beautiful, one arm thrown over her eyes, her mouth open a little, and I had the kind of thought that you have in such a moment, staring at her so peaceful amidst what had been a nightmare of a week for me, that I wanted to keep her like that, soft and unbothered, untouched by the world. I decided that I would take a picture to save the moment, one that I would send to her in the morning, so she would see what it is that I see and love in her. So I lifted my phone off the nightstand and I opened the camera. The regular one. The dumb one that's been on every phone that I've ever owned. I wasn't thinking about any of it. Not the AI, not Brenna. Not the woman and her impossible gray eyes. I was looking at my girlfriend asleep and she looked peaceful, and I wanted to keep her like that. I took the picture. She was in the corner behind the headboard, folded under the slope of the ceiling, because there isn't height in our room for her to stand all the way up. Both eyes on the left of her face open, looking down not at me, but at Cass. Cass looked peaceful beneath her, almost untouched. Almost. There was something wrong around the edges of her face, a softness that I could have blamed on motion blur if my hands had been moving, but they hadn't been. Her mouth, her cheek, the line of her jaw, all of it looked just a little less certain than the rest of the room. Every hair on me stood up at once. My hand started shaking so hard the picture juddered on the screen, and I clamped my other hand over it to hold it still and couldn't. And there was a thin, high sound in the room, and I realized after a moment that it was coming out of me. I could not make myself look up at the real corner over the headboard. Still, over the phone, I could see that there was nothing but empty air, and yet the very space felt malevolent now, poisoned. And yet there she was in the image, as real as anything, so close that I could almost touch her. I reached out before I could stop myself, finding only empty air. My stomach turned and I stood up as the threat of nausea gnawed at me. It had followed me. From my laptop to my phone, from the program to my camera to my very reflection. That woman had somehow followed me. And there she stood, separated only by less than a centimeter of glass. In my home. I almost woke Cass. My hand was on her shoulder, but I stopped because I didn't want this to be her problem too. She was asleep and undisturbed, and she didn't have to be scared yet when I knew that I was scared enough for the both of us. And what would it have done besides terrify her when I had no answers to give? So I took my hand back. Still, I needed someone who wasn't me to look at the thing and tell me that it was really there. I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. So I tried to post the picture to my Snapchat story. Just put it up, let one stranger comment, "What is that?" so I would know that I wasn't losing it. The upload bar crawled to the end and then nothing happened. I tried again, but the app just sat there like I had never touched it. I don't know how long I spent trying, moving between apps and platforms and trying to text the thing to friends, and then cast his phone before accepting that it was a fruitless endeavor. I didn't sleep that night. Rather, I lay at the foot of our bed, curled around Daniel at Cass's feet, my eyes never once drifting from that corner. And Brenna died on Friday. Yasmin told me at my desk, and I felt something in me come loose and fall a long way down. It had happened the way that she went under, quietly and all at once, the machines with nothing to fight. I sat at my desk, shell-shocked, my eyes staring at my computer screen yet seeing nothing at all. And underneath the grief was a thought that I could no longer stop from forming. She did this. Some way, somehow, that woman had done this. I don't know how, and I didn't know what she was, but she had her gray arms around Brenna in that picture, and now Brenna was gone. And I knew that I didn't get to call that a coincidence for a second time. Not now. Not after what I had seen in our bedroom. Something that had no business touching the world had reached out on a screen and touched it anyway. And a girl that I knew was dead. And last night I stood over my sleeping girlfriend and put her in a picture with the very same thing. And that was when the fear had shifted into something sharp and grinding inside of me. I stopped wishing it were a glitch, because I knew it wasn't, and every second I spent wishing was time wasted. Time I needed to be protecting Cass, protecting our home. And for that, I needed to know what she was. Because whatever she was real enough to kill. She had been watching my girlfriend. I made myself open the last photo that I had taken. The woman folded into our corner, and I saw that she had changed. It took me a second to find it, and when I did, the cold went all the way through me. The low eye on the right side of her face wasn't the impossible gray anymore. It was brown, warm, a living brown, with that fleck of amber near the iris that I had looked across a desk last spring. It was Brenna's eye, set into that ruined face like a stolen button. And the skin around it that drowned colorless gray. It had warmed by half a shade, the faintest blush coming up underneath like watered ink, like she had swallowed something still warm. Realization rose like nausea. She was wearing pieces of Brenna now. She was keeping them. Cass started sleeping in the morning after I took that picture. Cass, who hasn't slept in past 7 in the 6 years that I've known her, didn't get up until 11. And when she did, there was a grayness in her face, a flatness behind her eyes, and her hand around the coffee mug was cold despite the heat. "Oh, I think I'm coming down with something," she said and laughed, and the laugh had no air in it. I laughed too, and I recall the sound coming out wrong and hitched. She had another night terror that night. Different this time, not like the harmless ones that I had known for the past 6 years. It was perhaps just a bit past 2 a.m. when Cass shut up beside me, eyes open on the corner past the dresser staring at the door. I reached for her back on instinct. "She's so tall," Cass said. My hand froze halfway. "Oh, why won't she stand up straight?" It hardly sounded like a question. That flat, sleeping voice aimed at the doorway. "There's no room for her in here. She has to fold herself in half." "Cass," my voice shook, though I tried to sound certain. Somehow my blood felt both hot and cold, and the room seemed to spin. "Hey, you're dreaming. It's not real. Lie down." She looked at me. For the first time in all the years that I had seen her like this, she looked at me. And the expression she wore made my stomach twist. Her mouth hung slack as though she were staring at something from a nightmare, twitching as though she meant to speak but couldn't recall how. Eyes wide and watery. "She isn't yet, but almost," she hissed, and in her tone was something playful, almost mocking, and it took everything in me not to lurch away from my own girlfriend. And then, as though released from some spell, she collapsed back into her pillow, sleeping as though nothing had ever happened. My hands were shaking, but I lifted the phone anyway because I had to know, and I ended at the doorway and took the picture. She was at her bedroom door, emerging from the blackness beyond the threshold, folded under the frame to fit, that one brown eye and the gray ones all turned down at the bed. She was looking at Cass. I didn't sleep a wink that night. In the morning, Cass remembered nothing, and she was grayer, and she slept until noon, and accepted the lame excuse that I offered for why all the lights were on that morning with only a grunt. I spent much of the day hunched over my laptop under the guise of work, while Teams messages piled up unanswered as I searched for something, anything, that might shed some light onto what was happening to us. I began practically stalking the social media pages of Brenna and any relative of hers that I could find for anything, and finding nothing but well wishes and memorial posts. Each made the chasm in my chest grow wider. I typed a message to her boyfriend once and then twice, but never sent it, unsure of how I could even begin to ask him the questions that I had, and relented to simply watching over Cass like some guard dog. I keep taking the pictures. I realize now that's the only way that I can track her, the only way to know when she's close. I can't see the woman any other way, not with my own eyes, and not like Cass when she's in that state. I've stood in that room and stared at the corner, and there is nothing there but air. And yet I know, somehow, somewhere she's lingering, in a place between the one in the pictures and where we exist. She lives. The only way to know where she is, how close she's come, is to look through the glass. And so I look. It's almost 3 a.m. as I write this. Cass is asleep upstairs. I'm down here because I can't make myself go to that room. I've tried to attach these pictures to this post 11 times. They won't go, not here, and not to X, and not to any subreddits. Not anywhere. I've been reading. I've been spending wasted, useless hours on it. Reading crackpot theories about whether anything can actually wake up inside these systems. Emergent consciousness, the threads call it. Something coming alive in all that math that nobody put there or asked for. I don't know if that's what she is. I don't know if she's that, or a ghost, or something older that just found a new kind of door. And I've stopped believing that the difference matters. Here's what I think, for whatever my guess is worth. I think whatever this thing is, she takes something out of the people in her pictures. Something there isn't a clean word for, maybe. Brenna had it and then she didn't. And when it was taken, she was left a husk of herself and then a corpse. And I think, I can't be sure, it's just a feeling that I can't put down. That being in our pictures had stopped being enough for her. The face in someone else's photo, the shape in the dark glass, the thing in the reflection that's gone when you turn around. I don't think it's enough anymore. I believe it wants whatever it is that we have, what it has been made to witness through the looking glass. I don't know. Even reading that now, I sound insane, and I'm starting to wonder if I might not be. I'm sure you will all be certain to reassure me. But still, the internet is a big place. As new as this technology is, I have to think. I have to hope selfishly that I'm not the first to encounter something like this, and that one of you out there has an answer that can help me put an end to this and return to what my life was a week ago. Anyways, I just heard Cass get up. As I write this, she's at the top of the stairs, flat shoulders, open eyes, but not really awake. After 6 long years, I've seen her like this before. Every other time, she stared at a corner, a wall, nothing at all. Well, she isn't staring at the corner tonight. She's staring at me. and she has her phone up, both hands, held the way you hold it to take somebody's picture. The little lens pointed straight down the stairs at me, the screen lit with that soft glow, and behind that, she smiles. 6 days I've spent terrified of what's in the pictures. It never once occurred to me to be afraid of being the one in the frame. Cass is smiling. She's smiling down at me the way she has never in 6 years smiled at anything. She just tapped the screen. The detective agency where I used to work has no sign outside of its offices, no online presence or publicly listed phone number. Its client list is exclusive, wealthy, and word of mouth only. In the 2 years that I've spent employed there, no one ever buzzed at the reinforced doors without an appointment. At least, not until last Saturday. There was something disarming about how the blonde waved at the security camera and held her designer bag with both hands while she waited for me to open the door. The clients that I was used to were corporate and political elites who saw me as a disappointing dollar value on their way to something better. I was the most junior agent, which might explain why I was stuck at the office while my superiors went golfing with former clients. Maybe that was why something about the sad young woman's smile had resonated with me. And by the time that she had sat down at my desk, the biometric security system had already worked up a profile that had told me the value of her wardrobe, the likelihood that she was armed or mentally unstable, and of course, her identity. Even before the information flashed across my screen, however, I thought she looked familiar. She was Rosha Goldham, the recent widow of construction mogul Isaac Goldham. Isaac had been gunned down after hours at one of his work sites just over a week ago. "Before you ask," the blonde began, "I've already told all of this to the police. I can't blame them for not believing me. I can hardly believe it myself." I tried not to think about the 35-year age gap between Rosha and her deceased husband, or the fact that her shoes alone were worth more than what I made in a month. At the agency, we were paid on commission. If I could land Rosha Goldham as a client, I would finally be making the kind of money and connections that it took to succeed in this business. I did my best to look sympathetic as I leaned across my desk and asked how I could help. "I would tell you my name," the blonde said, "but you know that already, don't you? Just like how you know about what happened to my husband." I nodded. In situations like this, it was usually best to just let the client talk. "What you probably don't know," she went on, "is that Isaac wasn't alone. I followed him to the worksite that night, and I saw the man who killed him." I fought to keep the surprise off my face. As far as I knew, the police didn't have any leads on the Goldham case. Rosha, meanwhile, had already launched into a description of the crime. "Oh, it might sound silly to you, detective, but I went after Isaac that night because I thought he might be cheating. I mean, where else would a multimillionaire be going on a rainy Wednesday at 2 in the morning without telling his wife? At any other time, I'm sure he would have noticed me, but something had him distracted. He parked illegally a few blocks over and squeezed through a cut in the fence like he had been doing it all his life. My heels got stuck in the mud trying to keep up with them. Have you ever been in a construction zone after hours, detective?" I shook my head. "Oh, it's dark, real dark. Apart from the lights they leave on to keep away the copper thieves. There's big, shadowy piles of junk everywhere. Ragged plastic that rattles in the wind. Cords tangled on the floor like the tentacles of some monster. Rosha shuddered. Only the skeleton of the apartment complex was finished. Isaac went down some stairs on the side, toward where the basement was going to be, and that was as far as he got. What could he have been looking for down there, Detective? It was nothing but a bunch of bare concrete hallways and drain pipes. Rosha drew in a deep breath. I thought the guy was a squatter at first. I mean, he had on this long coat and wide-brimmed hat, the kind that went out of style like 100 years ago. Anyway, I saw something gleam in his hand. It was the barrel of a gun. I screamed, Isaac turned, and the stranger started blasting. I've never heard anything so loud. And in the light of the gunfire, I saw him. He was so pale that I could see the veins beneath his skin. His teeth looked longer than they should have been, like his gums had rotted away or something. And his face was... The young widow buried her face in her hands. I got some hot tea from the coffee stand and I placed it in front of her. She wrapped her hands around the mug but didn't drink. Oh, I'm sorry, Rosha sobbed. After the shooting finally stopped, the stranger lifted a grate and climbed down a ladder. The police told me that it leads into the drainage tunnels. Rosha took the tissue that I offered her, blew her nose, and then suddenly looked up at me with fierce, tearful blue eyes. You know what people are saying, right? A young widow, a big fortune, an unsolved murder. It doesn't matter what any jury decides. If this ends here, I'm going to be a pariah for the rest of my life. So it wasn't about justice. It was about her. I couldn't say that I was surprised. But if Rosha Goldham wanted to pay me several $100 an hour to go stomping through the sewers in search of a pale boogeyman in a trench coat, who was I to argue? I took down a few more details and promised to contact her as soon as I had something. My next call was to Mickey Falstaff at the records office. I don't know what my superiors had on Mickey, but he could get us any documents that we needed from the local government, without the red tape. I told him that I needed some maps of the sewer system. When he asked what for, I laughed and told him that I was hunting a ghost. For some reason, Mickey didn't seem to think that that was funny. He promised to send over the plans that I had requested, but he cautioned me to compare them to the past decades' missing persons reports before I did anything else. There was a significant overlap. I mean, of course there was. The drainage tunnel access points were likely to be in rough neighborhoods and isolated areas. Exactly the sorts of places where people were likely to disappear. It was so obvious that I wondered just what the hell Mickey had meant by that ominous warning of his. An hour later, I was outside the drainage tunnel entrance that was nearest to the murder scene, and geared up with thick rubber boots and multiple sources of light. I still hadn't told my employers or anybody else where I was going. I needed to find something for Rosha before some more experienced agent swooped in and stole her away from me. I was breaking half a dozen agency rules already, and if I didn't return to the surface with something, I could kiss my career goodbye. The first thing that I noticed was the smell. A putrid, greenish odor like if water could rot. I followed it to the far side of an abandoned lot, trying not to cut myself on the torn open chain link fence. There it was, a lightless, cylindrical tunnel. Somebody had built a ragged lean-to among all the garbage by its entrance. They had lit a fire in a rusty barrel too, but otherwise there was no sign of them. I switched on my headlamp and continued inside. The further that I got from the daylight, the less that I wanted to leave it behind. The walls were covered with graffiti. Somebody had smeared crap, or maybe tar, on one of them, in a manner that struck me as almost artistic. Something brushed against the back of my neck. I hoped it was a cobweb. The tunnel turned and I found myself in true darkness. alone except for the trickle of the water in the slimy culvert beside me. The shanty's trash and other signs of human occupation began to disappear. The tunnel connected with another larger gallery where water poured from pipes into a sinister black pool below. According to my map, the place where Isaac Goldham had been shot was about 100 feet above and to my right. I began moving a little more slowly, searching for a boot print, a shell casing, or any other sign of the mysterious machine gunner. Unlike the police who had been through here earlier, I had every incentive to believe Roche's story and take my time. But after an hour of searching, I still had nothing. I passed the access ladder leading up to Goldham's construction site, which had been sealed off by police tape even down here. I was making another pass through these surrounding tunnels when I realized that I had missed a turn. I retraced my steps to the previous intersection, but the view in all four directions was the same. Concrete, graffiti, debris, and darkness. I made a little pile of rubble and placed a coin on top of it to mark my place, and then I continued on ahead. If I didn't encounter the gallery with the black pool after several minutes, I could just return to my marker and try a different passage. That way, I was bound to find the exit tunnel eventually. Or so I thought. After 5 minutes of walking, there was no end to the first passage in sight. I turned back to try the second, but I never found my marker. As impossible as it was to believe, the shiny penny that I had placed there had somehow vanished. Who could it have been? One of the vagrants who inhabited these tunnels. A rat. I had seen several pairs of beady red eyes as I explored the tunnels, and every time I squeezed around a pile of rubbish, I hoped that I wouldn't look down and find a pair of yellow teeth about to sink into my ankle. Without it, however, I was truly lost. I stayed that way until I stumbled across another passage, one that seemed less used than the others. Maybe it had even been part of an earlier construction that was never walled off. It wasn't where I had come from, but it might have been the path that Isaac Goldstein's murderer had taken. If so, it would also give me a way out of the sewers. The tattered piles of wood and trash that clogged it hadn't been left by the homeless. They had been dragged in by flooding water and left behind when it receded. Something skittered along the wall as I brushed aside the ragged remains of a tarp. And that's when I saw the door. An old, thick piece of bare metal with a waterproof seal. This, I was sure, didn't appear on Mickey Falstaff's maps. I rummaged in my pack for a crowbar and shimmied the seal open until I could cut the lock. I noticed uneasily that the door could be padlocked from either the inside or the outside. There was no scurry of vermin within. It was just a dank, narrow hallway. But at its end was a white, panel-frame door, like something out of an old-fashioned house. There was even an iron porch lamp above it. If I strained my ears, I thought that I could even hear music. A woman laughed. A high-pitched, hysterical sound more suited to a cocktail bar than the depths of a sewer. And that eerily ordinary-looking door began to open, and for some reason my blood ran cold. I dashed back into the passage, switched off my headlamp, and crouched behind a heap of junk listening. "Oh, where are you going, Bert?" "Oh, I thought I heard somebody." A deep male voice slurred. The clack of fancy shoes echoed in the hallway. I caught a whiff of old-fashioned cologne, cigar smoke, whiskey, and gun oil. I held my breath. "Oh, there's nothing out there but the rats," another man yelled. "So you'll fit right in." There was another peal of laughter. Then came a clatter of clanging metal and a grunt of surprise. Bert had found the lock that I had cut. "What the hell?" he mumbled. I bit down a scream as something with a lot of legs crawled across my hand. "I know you're here, jackass." Bert shouted into the tunnel. "If you come out right now and don't make me go looking for you, maybe we can be friends. If not..." He trailed off and stepped out into the passage. Despite not having any source of light apart from the cracked open door behind him, the stranger navigated through the tangled junk with ease. An impossible thought occurred to me. He could see in the dark. If that was true, he would find me as soon as he turned around. I did some quick mental math, calculating the distance to the nearest bend in the tunnel, and then I made a run for it. The man called Bert spun immediately. The boom of his automatic rifle was deafening. "Oh, don't go," he shouted. "The fun's just getting started." I slipped in the slimy water and crawled on my hands and knees around the corner, panting. Through the painful ringing in my ears, I could barely hear my pursuer's footsteps, slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. And in a sense, he did. I was going to die here, I realized, gunned down in a sewer by some psycho with a machine gun. Still, I didn't have to make it easy for him. And gritting my teeth against the pain, I got to my feet and ran blindly ahead, feeling my way along the wall for the next passage. My shin bashed against the corner of a discarded bathtub. Spiders scrambled angrily across my face as I crashed through the tattered remains of a shower curtain that had gotten tangled up in the pipes overhead. More ear-splitting gunshots lit the tunnel ahead. I had almost made it to the next intersection. The remains of a tin can exploded near my feet. Bert wolf whistled at me. He was enjoying this, I realized. Maybe he was even missing on purpose, trying to see how far he could run me before I collapsed from exhaustion. He was playing with me like some sick-minded kid torturing a bug. But the longer that I stayed alive, the greater my chances of escape would be. I faced my headlamp backward, switched it on, and was rewarded by an angry snarl as the bright beam spoiled my pursuer's night vision. I caught a glimpse of a bulky silhouette, similar to Roche's description. Fedora, pinstripe suit, a horribly pale face with dark, tiny eyes. Bert's curses were drowned out by another burst of gunfire. He had missed again, but instinct told me that my little trick had taken the joy out of the game for him. Now he was shooting to kill. I took a left and then another. I spotted daylight coming from a shoulder-wide pipe in the wall and I scrambled into it. I squeezed through until I saw an ordinary sewer grate up ahead. As I jumped up to pull myself out into the street, I took a final look back down the pipe. Although I couldn't be sure, I thought that I saw the reflection of daylight on a pair of shiny shoes. I had crawled out into a neighborhood of overgrown lots and shuttered rundown houses. The elderly woman and child on the opposite sidewalk avoided eye contact with me, and I couldn't say that I blamed them. I was filthy, wide-eyed, and cut in a dozen places, but I was alive. I had confirmed that the psycho from Roche's story was real. I even had some idea of where to find him. Still, as exclusive as the agency was, we weren't some paramilitary force. With my phone back in service, the first call I made was to the police. It was the strangest interaction that I ever had with law enforcement. A young, disbelieving officer took me to an interrogation room, where a few hours later a plainclothes detective heard my story and told me to wait some more. 2 hours passed before a middle-aged woman in a suit stalked into the room and threw the lock that I had severed onto the steel table. Trespassing, vandalism, destruction of government property. She ran down a list. Oh, and that's just a start. If you ever bring this up again, we'll prosecute you for all of it to the fullest extent of the law. Oh, those maximum penalties might not seem like much. The gray-haired woman grinned cruelly. Oh, but believe me, they add up. Oh, and I suggest you prepare a box for any possessions you still have at your agency. I've just spoken with the chief of the board. You're officially out of a job. Might be a good time to start over, huh? Maybe in another town. Someplace with better prospects. Think about it." The woman turned to go. In less than 30 seconds, she had completely taken apart my life, and I didn't even know her name. I stood, my jaw hanging open. The young officer that I had spoken with earlier was there, but the indulgent smile was gone from his face. He gripped my arm none too gently and led me out of the station. I felt like a stranger in my own city. I thought about the apartment that I had just moved into, confident that my high-paying job at the agency would cover the rent. I could last for another 2 months, maybe 3, but after that, who could say? The agency wasn't exactly going to give me a glowing reference. I pondered what the woman had said. I could pack my bags and head back to the West Coast like a dog with its tail between its legs. Or I could pay a visit to Rocha Goldham. The Goldham place was an imposing downtown structure with views of the lake. Not that there was much to see on such a dreary afternoon. Between the silence and the gray rain drumming against the windows, it reminded me of an overpriced mausoleum. And there was a semicircular desk beside the elevators where a doorman or security guard might have sat, but it was empty. I buzzed to Rocha's penthouse myself and she let me up immediately. "Oh my God," she said instead of hello. "Oh, what happened to your face?" Although my exploration gear was tucked away in my backpack, the cuts and bruises from my flight through the sewers were obvious. I fidgeted with my hat and fumbled for an answer. Without my desk, my cutting-edge computer, and the reputation of the agency liked to back me up, I felt surprisingly lost. And it didn't help that Rocha was so damn beautiful. She had changed into a simple, eloquent black dress. Her cheeks were flushed with emotion. I decided to begin with the most important, obvious thing that I could. I told Rocha that I believed her. I told her that I really had found something in the drainage tunnels, and although I wasn't sure what we were dealing with, I was willing to see it through to the bitter end. Her result wasn't what I had expected. She pushed away from the ultra-chic couch that she had been leaning on, crossed the room and threw her arms around me. Her lips brushed against my ear as she spoke. "He's in the closet, aiming at both of us. He told me that he would kill me if I didn't invite you up. I'm sorry." My eyes darted over Rocha's shoulder to the lightless, cracked open hall closet. A polished black shoe nudged open the door. I knew the rhythm of those footsteps, and now to my horror, I could see the rest of the stranger clearly. Beneath the harsh lights of Rocha's apartment, his skin seemed almost transparent. The hole where his nose used to be made his face appear skull-like. There was nothing weak or sickly about his eyes. However, their oversized black pupils sparkled with cruel intelligence. He wasn't a monster. He was a man just like me. And somehow that made it worse. "A long time no see, buddy," he sneered. The recession of his purplish gums made his teeth appear to be nearly twice the normal length. "Walk." He waved a revolver in our direction, and then tucked it into the pocket of his overcoat. If either of us tried to shout a warning, the other would be dead before anyone could help. We were marched back through the lobby and out into the rain. I thought I knew now why the security guard's chair had been empty. The pale stranger led us to a back alley manhole cover and gestured at me to lift it. Everything that I had ever heard about kidnappers, murderers, and second locations flashed through my head. But I knew from experience that we would both be gunned down right here if I didn't cooperate. For the second time that day, I climbed down into the drainage tunnels. The stranger handed Rosha a clunky old-fashioned flashlight and ordered her to go after me. He dropped down behind us with feline grace. "Walk," he repeated. Rosha and I did as we were told. Apart from the distant noise of rushing water, there was nothing to mark the passage of time. It felt like forever before we had arrived at another one of those rusted, slab-like metal doors. The stranger tossed me a key and told me to open the padlock. An unsettling question gnawed at me. If the pale gunman and his accomplices came from within the metal doors, why were they sometimes padlocked from the outside? The corridor on the other side was identical to the one that I had encountered before, down to the white wood panel door and the wrought iron porch lamp. Before, it had felt eerily out of place. Now it felt like if I walked through it, I would never come out again. "Oh, just couldn't let it go, could ya?" the stranger was saying. "Just had to stick your nose in a little further, and look where it got ya. Knock 3 times, he told Rosha. "Slow." She followed his instructions, and when she saw the man on the other side, she screamed. A hideous growth covered half of his face, swelling shut his right eye, but I had no doubt that he could see well enough to use the machine gun that he was holding. A shiver ran through me. Who the hell were these disfigured men, and why were they dressed like they had walked out of the 1930s? "Bert," the disfigured man smiled with empty gums. "Oh, look what the cat dragged in. The boss is gonna be pleased, especially with her." He made a noise that might have been a whistle as he leered at Rosha, and then, without warning, he bashed the butt of his weapon into my nose. I went down, blood spurting from it. "Pugh," Bert grunted. "Can't even stand a little love tap." He kicked my ribs with the tip of one of his polished shoes. "Now you see why we've got the red carpet." He wasn't kidding. The stuff might have been fancy at one time, but years of dampness and overuse had taken their toll. With its unevenness and dark patches, the maroon floor looked like a roughening sea of blood. There was particle board and wallpaper on the walls, although it too was peeling away in ragged yellow strips. Something seemed off about the antique brass lamps. It took me a moment to realize that they were lit by gas. 100 years ago, this place would have been the lap of luxury, but now it looked like a badly cared for antique shop. Another kick connected with my kidney, and I decided to keep my comments about the decor to myself. "Walk," Bert snarled, "or better yet, crawl." He hung his fedora beside several others at the door and ran his fingers through his scabbed, greasy, half-fallen-out hair. Not wanting to give him the satisfaction, I lurched to my feet and staggered down the hallway beside Rosha, pressing a fist against the worrying pain in my side. We veered left, and I gasped at what I saw around the corner. It was a ballroom complete with chandeliers, a bandstand, and a grand staircase. Several girls in barely their dresses lounged against the bar, fear and resignation in their sunken eyes. Another overweight man in a gaudy suit lounged behind it, fiddling with a phonograph. The white tablecloths were threadbare, the plaster on the ceiling cracked. The moisture in the air made the frescoed angels appear to be crying ink-black tears. What the hell was this place? A pair of double doors swung open on the far side of the room. 2 of the girls glanced up as we passed. One seemed like she wanted to shout a warning, and the other seemed to be considering making a grab for the big man's gun while he was distracted, but decided against it. The third stared at the counter, too drunk or traumatized to react to our presence. With a shudder, I realized why they looked so familiar. All 3 could have been grown-up versions of some of the missing persons photos that I had seen earlier. A pair of double doors opened on the other side. 2 men, young, uncomfortable in their baggy outfits, and not quite so disfigured, held them open for us. Within, a group played cards around a table. The light was so dim that I couldn't make out much more than their hands and shirt sleeves. "This is them, boss," Bert announced, bowing his head respectfully. The large man at the rear of the table waved a large, scarred hand. The other card players backed away into the shadows. He snapped his fingers and somebody brought him a gin and tonic on a silver plate. For a minute, there was no sound but the hammering of my heart against my chest. Then the man that they called Boss finished his long, slow sip. "Let me ask you a question," he said, arms wide open and treacherously friendly. "Just who do you think you're dealing with here?" These psychos were going to torture us to find out what we knew and then kill us. I could see that clearly now. It might be slower or faster, more or less painful, depending on what I said. But no matter what, the outcome would be the same. Rage boiled over inside of me. "A bunch of freaks in cheap suits," I snapped. "You're something out of a bad gangster movie." Bert moved to hit me, but the boss held up a hand. "Oh, a gangster movie, huh?" he mocked. "You've ever heard of somebody called Alphonse Capone?" I glared. Chicago's most famous crime boss had been dead for nearly a century, but just about everybody in the city knew his name. "Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Let me ask you another question. You really think a guy like that with all those millions would just let himself get locked up behind bars? There have always been lookalikes willing to go to prison to protect their families, and there have been tunnels in this city since the 1860s. "So what?" I snorted. "You want me to believe that you're Al Capone?" "His great-grandson, actually. And if you're asking yourself why we're allowed to go on doing business down here, just look at what happened to Mr. Isaac Goldham. Murdered by a guy with no fingerprints, no birth certificate, and absolute loyalty to me. How many others do you think we've washed over the years? Why get rid of us when we can be so useful to the powers that be?" "And the disappearances," I challenged. "Well, I mean, we gotta repopulate somehow, right?" The boss laughed. "Our connections up top take care of the rest. They keep us in good food and good liquor, even send down medicine to keep us from getting any, sicker. And in return, we do what we do best." I thought about the weird facial sores, the rotted off limbs and skin that never saw sunlight. Hadn't the real Al Capone died of syphilis? Regardless of whether there was any truth to what this psychopath was saying, the symptoms lined up. I was no doctor, but even I knew that the horrible mutations that I had seen down here could be prevented if treatment happened early enough. But did the boss and his goons know that? If somebody up above wanted to control and use these twisted underground hitmen, then making them medically dependent would be a perfect strategy. "Oh, it's been nice talking to you. We don't get many visitors down here, you know," the boss commented. "And besides, there's something, I don't know, refreshing about spilling your guts to some stranger. Confession's good for the soul, they say. And while they've got plenty of ladies and liquor down here, we ain't got no priest. They take their secrets to the grave, you know. And you will too." The boss leaned forward and grinned. From the top of his nose to the bottom of his chin, the center of his face was a single gruesome, weeping sore from which his teeth stuck out at jagged angles, like bent tombstones. He snapped his fingers again and strong hands closed around Rosha and I, pulling us apart. I fought to hang on to her, but somebody punched me in the stomach. The last things that I saw before the double doors swung shut was the look of wide-eyed terror on her face. I was dragged back through the decaying ballroom and down another hallway. I caught a glimpse of a kitchen, a storage closet, even an antiquated gymnasium. There was everything a certain type of person could want, except for sunlight. And then it was out another door, down a flight of slime-covered stairs, and into a dripping concrete corridor lit only by Bert's flashlight. The complex was enormous. Part palace, part prison, part foul spiderweb that linked to every drainage tunnel in the city. I thought about the rats that I had seen before. If there were any down here, they were probably bigger and more aggressive than I could possibly imagine. Bert kicked something as he walked. It was a skull, I realized numbly, just like the plastic ones that were hung up in science classrooms or what you would see on Halloween. Only this one was real. Mold grew out from a hole in its cranium. There was another staircase ahead, one that looked far older and more dilapidated than the first. It disappeared into dark water halfway down. No matter what, I told myself I wasn't going to go down those steps. Bert set down the flashlight. A gesture passed between him and the other goon restraining me. Before I knew what was happening, Bert had pinned me by my throat against the grimy wall while the other pulled off my clothes. Laughing, they shoved me down the slick stairs and into the water. I'll never forget that feeling. It was oily, cluttered with offal and grease, and freezing cold. I stepped gingerly, knowing that one bent nail or jagged piece of glass would foil any chance that I had of escape. A rusty steel grate clanged shut behind me. Was this a prison, a torture pit? What the hell had been the point of dumping me down here without even a stitch of clothing? The beam of the flashlight grew further away. I realized with horror that they were going to leave me here, in the pitch blackness and chilling, scummy water. Even Bert's presence was better than that. I shouted after them, but they were already gone. It was the deepest darkness that I had ever known. Something splashed into the water. I wished that I had looked in the opposite direction, that I had gotten some idea of the way ahead while I could. Because now all that I could do was feel my way blindly along the stone. And there was light up ahead, the same dim, eerie gaslight that illuminated the whole complex. I didn't want to move toward it, but waiting in the foul water was even worse. The slow sloshing of my footsteps felt like some kind of countdown. I didn't understand what the round space was until another grate clanged down behind me. I was in a pit about 30 feet across, constructed of slick, rough brick. Shadowy figures looked down on me. I could hear chatter and the clinking of glasses above. As my eyes adjusted to the light, I realized that the space above had the same gaudy style as the ballroom that we had been marched through before. The faces watching were also familiar. I recognized Bert, the boss, several of the other gangsters and their victims, as well as Rosha. At some point, she had been forced to change into one of the same sheer flapper dresses that the other girls wore, complete with a feathered headband. A red velvet rope lowered into the pit. A shirtless figure scrambled down it. He had the same sores and wide, light-deprived pupils as the others, but he was barely more than a teenager. My stomach turned at the thought that kids grew up down here, surrounded by decadence, decay, and violence. They became the next generation of killers. And that was why I hadn't been gunned down on sight. They had been saving me, I realized, to serve in this boy's initiation ritual. He spat, flexed, and cracked his neck. Somebody tossed a pair of switchblades into the ankle-deep water. "Time for your first blood, Joey." The boss's voice rumbled down from on high. "Show us his guts in you," he said to me. "If you win, you and your girl can walk out of here. No strings attached. How's that for a deal?" As an answer, I stooped, snatched the knife, and held it at the ready. The boy kicked his up and caught it with a flourish. He puffed his chest out at me, trying to look intimidating, but the uncertainty in his eyes was obvious. His muscular build had made him look older than he was. Now that we were face to face, I was sure that he couldn't have been more than 14 years old. Now, I was no Navy SEAL, but the agency didn't hire anyone who couldn't handle themselves in a fight. The kid lunged, but he didn't overextend. Somebody had trained him well. He kicked water at my face before his next cut, but the motion threw him off balance. I dived in and shoulder tackled him while he still had one hand in the air. The boy tried to stab downward into my shoulder, but the blade fell from his hands and clattered away. The room echoed with boos and cheers. I lifted my knife on high and the boy cringed. I hesitated, and that was all the advantage that he needed. He elbowed the side of my head and rolled me. He pinned my wrist, bashing it again and again into the ground until I let go of my only weapon. His strong, bone-white fingers gripped my throat. As I struggled to break free, he headbutted me, and then leaned in and whispered into my ear, "Play dead. Even if you win, they'll shoot you anyway." It sounded much less like a lie than what the boss had told me. The boy pretended to strangle me and I played along. My nose was already bleeding, and the blood in the water made the lie look more real than it might have otherwise. "Oh, that was quick," Bert complained. From where I floated with my eyes shut tight, I could hear the clunking of his enormous antique gun. "I'll say, boss, how about I light him up a little bit? That guy had me running all over the city." "Save it," the boss cut in. "I need you to go take out this law student up by Devon Avenue. She's been asking some ugly questions about where the public works money goes." Still grumbling, Bert lumbered off. "That was some fast thinking, Joey. I was afraid that he had you for a minute." The boy's footsteps splashed as he walked to the pit wall and scrambled back up the velvet rope. Rosha was crying. "Flush him," the boss sighed. Another grate screeched open. Water flooded into the pit, lifting me up and carrying me along with it. I was swept down a second filthy passage. Clumps of algae, discarded cans, and worse things brushed against me as I passed. The light at the end of the tunnel was getting further and further away. I clenched my teeth to keep from crying out as I bumped against a pile of something jagged. I couldn't see what this stuff was, but it was everywhere, piled so thick and tall that water could barely slip through. As something brushed against my bare foot, I reached out and gripped it, afraid that it was some kind of horrible underground creature. But it was only the leg of the pants that I had been wearing earlier. The rest of my possessions followed behind. They had been disposed of right along with me, and among them was my waterproof headlamp. I switched it on and finally realized what the water had pressed me up against. Human bones, an entire wall of them, clotted with the ragged remnants of clothes and belongings. Although some were adult, the majority were the malformed remains of those younger. The unwanted, I suppose, of the human monsters upstairs. At the top of the hideous mound, there was another grate. I climbed hand over hand, trying not to think about what supported me, or how long it would be able to hold my weight. The grate above was locked, of course it was. I had avoided a quick death by gunfire only to earn a longer, far more terrible one of starvation in the dark. There was another splash in the water down below, similar to the one that I had heard earlier. I angled my headlamp down. Half a dozen blind, red eyes stared back at me. Maybe my death wasn't as far away as I had thought. Just as I had feared, they were the biggest rats that I had ever seen. Their lips peeled back when they saw me. They climbed hungrily and without a hint of fear, given the pile around them. I figured they had been surviving on human flesh for quite some time now. I kicked at the nearest one. It dodged easily, leapt, and sank its fangs into my leg. It was the size of a cat, its black fur sleek and oily beneath my fingers as I fought to pull it away. Another sprang onto my back, its tiny claws scratching at my bare shoulder as it struggled to get closer to my neck. Its wormy tail was at least a foot long. Loose bones slipped beneath my feet, splashing into the water below. I was losing my balance, and more rats were already scurrying up the pile of bones. "Hit him in the eyes," a voice hissed from above me. It was the boy, Joey. "They don't like that." It wasn't as easy as he had made it sound, but it worked. While I swatted away the vermin, Joey unlocked the grate. After scrambling through and slamming it down on the gnashing teeth below, I asked him why he was helping me. "The boss says we're better off down here, where we can do what we want and take what we want. He says the ones above have made themselves weak through too much easy living. But I'd been outside once with Bert, back when I was barely old enough to walk. I want that, not this. If I can get you out of here, will you help me?" And dripping and shaken, I nodded. I had one condition, however. We weren't leaving without Rosha. In the wavering light of my headlamp, I saw Joey grit his teeth. "Oh, those guys' brains might be rotten from the sickness and too much booze, but they're not dumb. I used Bert's keys to get out of here, and it won't be long before he notices that they're gone. If I waltz back in there, he'll gut me without a second thought. It's too dangerous." I shook my head. I was going back for her, I told him, with or without his help. My heart raced. If he called my bluff and left me alone in this maze of dripping tunnels, I was a dead man. The pale boy sighed. He gestured for me to follow him. We went up a ladder and through a narrow, cobwebby shaft until he reached another one of those solid steel doors. He pressed his ear against it and listened. The clack of the key turning in the lock was horrifically loud. Its hinges creaked beneath so much heavy metal. We stuck our heads into another gas-lit hallway. It looked empty. Heaven, drunken piano notes echoed up from the ballroom. "Come on," Joey murmured. "They keep the girls down here." The hallway that he had led me to was lined with bolted, scratched-up doors. Somebody was weeping inside one of them. "My ma was locked up in one of these rooms almost all her life," Joey was saying. "And then one day she was just gone. Outlived her usefulness," the boss said. And then he laughed. "Your girl will be in that one at the end of the hall, if the boss isn't with her already." I ran to the last door on the left and unbolted it. Rosha looked up from where she sat in the corner of the bed, a trembling glass of whiskey in her hand. Pressing a finger to my lips, I gestured toward the hallway. As she sprang to her feet, I smelled cigarette smoke and heard the click of a pistol hammer being pulled back. "Every time a door opens in this place, I get a buzz down in my office," the boss sneered. "Or didn't you know?" The boss and two of his pearly-skinned goons stood to my right. Bert was on my left, his enormous Tommy gun in hand. There was no sign of Joey. "How the hell did you get out of that pit?" the boss chuckled. "You know what, I don't want to know. Nice seeing yous." He squeezed the trigger. I flung myself back through the door of Rosha's cell. Two splintered craters appeared in it where I had been standing seconds before, and then I noticed the smoke. "What's that?" the boss shouted. "Smells like something's on fire. Bert, go see what's burning. I'll take care of these two." Rosha and I crouched behind the tattered stained mattress. There was nowhere else to take cover. Had Joey set the blaze as a distraction? If so, I hoped he knew what he was doing. The boss, meanwhile, didn't seem to be in any hurry. He strode slowly into the room, firing a lazy shot at our hiding place. Clouds of dust and feathers flew up from where the bullet had ripped through the cloth. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I felt myself giving up. Here I was, hundreds of feet beneath the city that I thought I knew so well, about to be murdered by some diseased, rotted gangsters who still lived like it was the 1930s. The boss's bulk was blocking the door. He had 3 shots left in his revolver. There was no way out of this. No way that we were leaving this squalid little room alive. Before I knew what was happening, Rosha had sprung to her feet and gripped the brass table lamp and flung it at the boss's head. The impact barely staggered him, but it was enough. Rosha and I darted past and out the door before he could reestablish his aim. We started coughing almost immediately. Whether it was due to the confined space or the dusty filth of what was burning, I wasn't sure, but the air was thick with cloying smoke. Joey waved at us through the haze, indicating a way out. The boss's next two shots went wide as we ran to him. I could hear the big man cursing and shouting behind us, the chamber of his revolver nearly empty. My skin seemed to crackle in the heat. I pressed the cloth of my wet shirt over my face. I was sweating more than I ever had in my life, and with each passing second it was getting harder and harder to breathe. The staircase that we took crumbled into embers as we sprinted up it. From the rubbery odor in the air, the soles of my shoes were beginning to melt. The lights went out. Somebody had shut off the gas that powered the place's antique lighting. The only illumination now was the orange glow of distant flames. The hallway ahead ended in a T. Wails, screams, and a burst of gunfire reverberated from the left. Our little group veered right. Joey led us past a slime-covered empty swimming pool and through the remains of what appeared to have once been a bowling alley. Its peeling plaster now hung like Spanish moss from the ceiling. They really had given themselves every luxury down here, and now it was all going up in flames. I grunted in pain as my toes bashed against a table leg. With the fire so far away, it was nearly impossible to see. And then Joey opened a door and the fire roared in. The boy sprung back with a scream. I could sense him beginning to panic. The fire had changed course and burnt up his plans along with the gaudy wallpaper. "You got this," I reminded him. "You know all the ways out of here, and we're going to get to one before they find us." Joey looked at the wickedly curling flames in front of us and nodded. He didn't look convinced. We doubled back, and although we hadn't seen or heard anyone, I found myself still scanning the dark corners for Bert. The hallway where we had heard the gunfire was now suspiciously empty. As we crept down it, I knew that I would feel this hellish heat and see this awful orange glow in my nightmares until the day that I died. The smoke grew thicker every second until at last, we were in front of a thick metal door. The same one that we had come in through, I realized. Joey's fingers shook as he fiddled with the keys. "It's not working," he coughed. "Birdie must have changed the locks." The fire was here now, creeping around the corner like a living thing. "Give me those." Rosha grunted through the cloth that she held over her face. The padlock gave in on her second try. Joey must have been too tense to realize that he had been using the wrong key, but it didn't matter now. We rushed out into the damp but cool air of the drainage tunnels, and didn't wait around to see if anyone followed. I switched on my headlamp and did my best to decipher a route back to the surface. "Do you think they escaped through one of the other exits?" Rosha asked. Joey shrugged. "I don't know. The boss and the rest of them can burn for all I care. To think that I used to look up to them, that I wanted to be like them." The boy trailed off sickened. I tried to slow my heaving breaths, swap the beam of my headlamp from side to side, and I listened for footsteps that never came. 4 minutes later, we were standing beneath the rainy, light-polluted night sky, so happy that we could have kissed the concrete. Gawking at the bright lights and tall buildings, Joey muttered that he needed someplace to lay low for a while. He was an undocumented miner, and even after a lifetime underground, he could guess how difficult that would make life up here on the surface. Rosha wanted to go straight to the authorities. I thought about the gray-haired woman who had threatened me earlier and told her that that probably wasn't a good idea. "There's a hotel used by the elite in town," Rosha told us. "A place with no cameras where nobody checks IDs, and they forget your face the moment that you're through the door. I'll get us a room and give you the number." But right now, you need to get yourself shots for rabies, tetanus, and a dozen other things. Go see a doctor and don't worry. I can take care of the kid." "I'm not just some kid, you know," Joey protested. "I saved both your asses back there and you better not forget it." We told him that we wouldn't. A haze of smoke from the underground blaze filled the rainy air. In the distance, I heard the wail of sirens. If we didn't want to answer some very uncomfortable questions, it was time to disappear. Rosha made a phone call, then gave me an address and a room number. As I watched her and Joey walk off into the night, I glanced uneasily over my shoulder at the mouth of the drainage tunnel. For some reason, I couldn't help but feel like I was making a terrible mistake. There was a heap of old magazines and newspapers in the lobby of the dingy 24-hour clinic that I had visited, and a few of them contained articles about Isaac Goldham's murder, a multimillionaire, a real estate developer. He had gotten into a dispute with the local government over his next build site, and while the official causes were blurry, I knew the true reason. The structure was going to be built right on top of the complex that Rosha and I had escaped from. There was a possibility that the construction would have brought to light the horror beneath our feet. I thought about all the whistleblowers and reformers who had died in the city under mysterious circumstances, and I felt a shiver run up my spine. How many of them had seen the same sight in their final moments? A man with pearly white skin and a half-rotten face, flexing a knife, a garrote, or automatic weapon in his gloved hands. A living ghost who couldn't be traced. The perfect assassin for those in power. With my doctor visit complete, I hurried to the hotel address. Just as Rosha had said, it was clearly a high-end place, but I never would have guessed its function from the outside. The desk clerk didn't look up when I crossed the lobby. My heart raced while I waited for the elevator to reach the 4th floor. I hadn't realized how much in a single day these people had come to mean to me. Maybe right now Rosha was drying her hair after showering off the filth of such a nightmarish day. Maybe the kid Joey was sitting transfixed in front of the color television. 414, that was their room number. But as the elevator doors opened, I realized that its door was standing open. There's no need to describe what I found on the other side. It was easy enough to imagine. A hotel for the elites, Rosha had said. And maybe the desk worker was more observant than he had appeared. Maybe the employers of those psychos had told their contacts to keep an eye out for a slim blonde woman and a buff, pale teenager. Maybe just as the woman in the police station had warned, no place in this city was safe for someone who knew what I knew. I could have chosen to stay and fight, but I didn't. The names involved are made up, but now, decades later, even the real ones had probably been forgotten. I retreated to the West Coast into calmer line of work, but I never forgot those 2 insane days. I never overcame the fear that one day the closet door will creak open and I'll find myself looking up at one of the boss's descendants, his mouth stretched wide in a syphilis grin. It's difficult to adjust to having something change the way you do or see ordinary things, like brushing your teeth. After getting stuck with sore, I got a lot more conscious about my teeth and mouth. It took some time getting used to the feeling of having something in my throat ready to shoot out like a coiled snake, or having breakfast and knowing there was something lurking in my stomach, resenting me, wishing to take the reins. It was still there, but after my run-in with the lady in the blue kaftan, it's as if I knew for a certain that it wouldn't kill me. That, and it wouldn't be an infection risk to others. That didn't mean it was gone, though. Getting back on patrol with Nick, he was the first to notice that I was behaving differently. We had stopped for our bi-weekly gas station hot dog, and I got myself a prepackaged sushi instead. There was something about less processed and more raw food that just made my stomach rumble with delight. Nick made the observation, acknowledged it, and let it go. He trusted me enough to tell him if something was up. We were having a proper Minnesota summer, meaning rain when you least need it. The Duck had pulled back on their resources, leaving Tomscog PD to focus on setting up a more permanent station. According to Nick, there had been talks about the Yearwalker getting himself killed or leaving the state, which meant peace and quiet, and the potential for something worse down the line. The whole reason for keeping the Yearwalker from getting killed was strictly because of a devil-you-know kind of deal. Someone else taking up that mantle could mean trouble. But in our everyday life, Yearwalkers and the Duck were the farthest thing from our minds. Instead, we picked up drunk teenagers, stopped speeding cars, or scolded shoplifters. Nick and I were even invited to speak about being in law enforcement at a local school. It surprised me how much Nick changed when he had an audience of kids. He blossomed up there. He was smiling ear to ear, engaging with the audience, and there was a sort of enthusiasm there that I hadn't seen before. Asking him about it, he had no idea what I was talking about. He shrugged it off as just getting along well with children. One day, we checked the Northwest Trail around Frog Lake. It was an off-foot kind of path, so we used it as an excuse to take a longer walk. Nick wasn't happy about it, but it was better than being cooked alive in a poorly ventilated patrol vehicle. It was probably the hottest day of the year. We were coming around the bend where the northern road curved back south. The left-hand side of the road past the lake was covered in pine trees. Walking past it, something stirred in me, just a twitch. I stopped to look around. Off in the distance between the trees, I could see a man. He was about 6'5", bald and dressed from top to bottom in a pitch-black trench coat. It looked so out of place that I couldn't believe what I was seeing at first. I poked Nick and pointed the man out. "Yeah, no, that ain't right," Nick said. "Should I shoot him?" "We can't just shoot people, Nick." "Then why the hell do I carry this badge around?" He took a couple of steps forward and whistled to get the man's attention. There was no reaction. We gave each other a questioning look as we spread out a little, covering two angles. Without turning away from us, the man backed off. Going further into the woods, there was a short section where we couldn't see him. I hurried forward, yelling at him to stop, but once we got a bit closer, he was already gone. But that stirring feeling in my stomach, that was still there. Nick caught up to me. "We ought to tell the sheriff about this one," Nick huffed. "Guy looks like a weirdo." "He was something, all right," I agreed. "But I don't know what." "Why are you saying what and not who?" "I don't know," I shrugged. "Feels like a what." And getting back to our makeshift station at the old fire department building, we went upstairs to have a chat with Sheriff Mason. He was already talking to someone, but they weren't very secretive, so we figured it was fine to approach. The sheriff turned to us with a plastered smile. His guest didn't make an effort to step away, giving me the impression that this was somebody in the know. It was a man in his early 50s. He had a faded blue shirt, a black tie, and black jeans. But I think what stood out to me the most was his pocket protector. People still use those. "Hank, these are two of my patrolling officers," the sheriff said. "Hank Dudley," said the man, offering a hand to us. "Hatchet Pharmaceuticals." "I think I'm wearing socks from you guys," Nick said with a grin. "Nice to meet you." We took turns shaking hands. "You had something to discuss?" the sheriff asked. "Yeah, we just wanted to bring something up," I said. But, "Oh, don't mind Hank, he's good people," the sheriff said. "Let's hear it." I told them about our patrol around the lake, and the man with the trench coat, and how he seemingly disappeared. It just gave me a bad feeling, I admitted. I don't know why. Hank gave me a curious look as if making a mental note. The sheriff pondered his options for a bit, leaving the floor open for others to chime in. I think I know what that is, Hank smiled. And if it is what I think it is, we really need to be on the lookout. Sheriff. Agreed, Sheriff Mason said. I ought to make sure we're all vigilant. I've heard of this thing, but it usually sticks to its home. As the sheriff walked away and Nick went to get a coffee, I was left alone with Hank for a bit. He adjusted his tie and square-shaped glasses. Miss, what did you feel when you first saw this man? Like a general worry, I guess. Nothing out of the ordinary. You feel that way a lot? Not really, no. He quieted down, giving a once-over to make sure that nobody was close enough to listen in. And did you by chance know Adam Salinger? I was going to deny it, but my reaction had already given away my honest answer. I sort of half-gasped and turned it into a smile. Yeah, Adam, I nodded. Didn't know his last name. Hank nodded as Nick returned with the coffee. There was something about Hank's look that just screamed at me to run for the hills. We were law enforcement, yes, but this was one of the hatchet men. And in corporate America, people like him make the laws. If you see that trench coat man again, I suggest you call it in, Hank said. I don't think it'd be a good idea to confront him. We'll keep that in mind, said Nick. There's coffee in the break room if you want. I shook my head. That stuff tasted like a tire fire. The sheriff made an official order later. If we saw the strange man again, he was to be taken in for questioning. Patrols were actively encouraged to seek him out and, upon encountering him, call for backup and to wait further instruction. We were given a couple of recommendations. One was to not be stingy with tasers, and another to not engage even if the suspect looked unconscious. There was also a mention that a strong spearmint spray could be used as a repellent. Yeah, that last one gave me pause too. Clearly, they knew more than they were letting on, but it was useless to push for more. The sheriff was still seen walking around with Hank at his side, and the two of them seemed to have come to some sort of understanding, and they weren't letting anyone in on their secrets. Over the weeks that followed, there was this sort of cat-and-mouse deal with the trenchcoat man. Patrols would report seeing him around the high school at night, and there were people calling in saying that they had seen him standing on rooftops. This wasn't just a one-time thing, it was reoccurring, and in proximity to ordinary people. But no one had been hurt, yet. We saw him a couple of times too, but only in the distance. Once when cruising down the highway. It was just in passing, but he was there. When we stopped and doubled back, he was already gone. Another time was when we came out of a pub downtown, and we were taking in a woman for public intox and disorderly conduct when I saw the trenchcoat man on a roof across the street. As soon as he saw that we had noticed him, he fled. But what bothered me the most was my unease. Every time he was near, something stirred in me. A tickle of something unpleasant. And sometimes I would feel it even when I didn't see him, as if he was close by but just out of sight. It was late July when I got a call from Nick. I had been at home for about 2 hours, relaxing after work, so I had already kicked my shoes off and had dinner. "He's here," Nick said. No hello, no anything, just that. I sprung out of my couch. "Right now?" I asked. "Yeah, right now. He's right outside. I think he's looking for a way in." I rushed to my car, grabbing only my gun and tool belt. Nick called down to the station while I rushed over. It was one thing for the stranger to stalk us from a distance, but we weren't taking chances when it came to home intrusion. If somebody had watched us for this long, they knew that we were armed and dangerous. If they still wanted to pursue us, something was wrong. By the time I got to Nick's, I saw somebody circling the right side of the building, peeking through the windows. I slammed my foot on the brakes, put the car in park, and I got out with my gun drawn. "Police, hands on your head," I screamed. "Get on your knees now." I was about 30 feet away, but I got a good eye. That uneasy stir in my stomach was going haywire, and I had to bite down not to have anything escape my throat. The man in the trench coat turned away from me and unfurled his jacket. Except it wasn't a jacket. It looked almost organic. It started to vibrate like the wings of a cockroach. Seconds later, he was gone, flown off into the night. My brain couldn't register what had happened fast enough. I could still hear the buzzing in the distance. And then I heard it again, this time from the other side of the building. There were two of them. And by the time I got to Nick, they were gone. He had locked himself in the bathroom, the only room without a window. I assured him that they were gone, and Nick got out with this pallid gray color on his face, like he had seen a ghost. Those weren't people," he wheezed. I don't know what." Yeah, I nodded. "Me neither, Nick." "You see the size of that thing?" He was still clutching his gun as he ran his fingers over his balding head. I put a hand on his shoulder, getting him to lower the gun. He snapped to attention, turning the safety back on and holstered it. "What the hell did they want?" he asked. I didn't have an answer, but I could still feel something was wrong, and that couldn't mean anything good. June had rolled into July at this point. More people were passing through Tomskog on a weekly basis as vacations began. Tomskog wasn't the kind of place for people to come visit, but a lot of folks passed through on their way south from St. Cloud, and at the very least, they stopped for gas. That meant we were getting more traffic than usual, and with traffic came traffic trouble. Instead of having a couple of stops a week, we went to having a couple of stops per day. And we were also getting a lot more calls. People fishing without a license, underage drinking, all kinds of stuff. But through it all, I could see Nick deteriorate. He was clearly worried, and he often told me how he thought he might have seen or heard something. Whatever was out there was clearly not leaving him alone. One morning, Nick didn't show up for work. I was asked to go check on him. Coming to his house, I could see that there was a good reason to be worried. The front door had been broken and there were smashed windows. I called it into dispatch and requested another patrol. I approached and called out to him, but I got no answer. The kitchen was a mess. The fridge was wide open and beeping incessantly. I eventually found Nick curled up in a closet, the one place that nobody had looked. I thought he was going to shoot me when I opened those doors, but he kept his cool. I helped him up, feeling a shiver coming down his arm. He leaned back against the wall as he caught his breath and wiped his forehead. "There's way more than two," he said. "Way more." That day, we were out in full force. Patrols were knocking on doors, asking people if they had seen anything. Officers were posted on rooftops. Charlie and Reggie on dispatch were keeping a map of the town at the station, marking the spot of every collective sighting. We were trying to find a pattern, something that we could use to get a location. We ended up with 4 possible sites to investigate further. The high school, an old scrapyard, a small house by the walking trail, and a house on the outskirts of town. All sites were to be investigated. Nick and I were to check out the lone house outside of town. We drove out there just after lunch. Nick was still shaken up about the whole thing, but he was handling it well enough. He wasn't his usual sarcastic self though. It was a 2-story house, abandoned by the looks of it. All the windows were broken and the paint was peeling off the walls. There was a messy yard with all kinds of scrap and broken tools scattered. A couple of empty planters lined the walkway to the front door. You could see the edge of an old greenhouse in the backyard. It must have been abandoned for some time, as the plastic that covered it had been suntanned by now. If you looked close enough, you could see a handful of dry blue sunflowers struggling along the tree line. "Someone lives here?" I asked. Locals think that it's haunted," Nick said. "It's not like fun haunted, but a people go missing kind of haunted. People have gone missing out here. Long ago, yeah. Ought to tear it down then. We can't even fill the potholes. This thing will be here for a century. We walked around the premises, checking the house from every angle. There was that tingle in my stomach again, a warning. I got the feeling that there was something there. I didn't know how to tell Nick, so I just asked him to keep his eyes open. Coming back around the front, I stepped up to the door. There is a strange smell to the place, like a combination of sulfur and ammonia. There were blue footprints on the wooden floor. I stopped to listen, noticing a clicking noise in the distance. There is a long corridor leading through the house. There is a sharp turn to the right about halfway through the corridor leading into the cellar. There was something moving down there. Walking through the corridor, I suddenly stopped. There is a vibration in my stomach, like something telling me to wait. Seconds later, I heard something. "Please leave." It sounded like two people speaking at once in the exact same cadence, but different voices. It was coming from the cellar. "Are you the owner of the property?" I asked. "No, my mother was. We're here investigating a reported disturbance." "This does not concern me." Nick pushed past me, knocking his hand on the wall. "All right, you need to come out," he said. "We need to have a conversation." "I would much rather we didn't." "I'm giving you a lawful order," Nick said. "You are not the owner of the property, you are trespassing. That and refusing a lawful order would be 2 charges. There was a short pause. Nick kept his hand on his taser just in case. "1 moment." A couple of seconds passed before we heard footsteps coming up from the cellar. Stepping out was the shape of a towering man, tall enough to scrape the top of his head across the ceiling. He had wrapped himself in blankets, showing only part of his feet. He had these strange, black leather shoes with 3 pointed ends. I had never seen that kind before. He was absolutely massive. Nick took his hand off the taser instead, touching his handgun. "Do you have any identification?" Nick asked. "No." "Do you have a name that we could run?" "Evan." Nick looked back at me with a raised eyebrow. I shrugged back at him. There was nothing illegal about being a large and strange man, but I couldn't shake this feeling that there was more to him. As Nick looked around the decrepit kitchen and living room, I was left alone with the large man, Evan. I didn't want to say anything, but he seemed curious about me. "Are you ill?" he asked. "Me?" "Yes." I didn't answer him. I just shook my head, waiting for Nick to finish checking the property. "What are you looking for?" "A strange man in a trench coat," I said. "He's been spotted around this area." "They are not here." "They?" I asked. "They," Evan said. "They are not strange men." "You seem to know a lot about this." "Yes." Nick joined me in the hallway. The large man adjusted his blankets, hiding his strange shoes. He asked us to join him in the living room. He sat down on an old moldy couch, almost folding himself in half. I had never seen a man sit like that before. The couch groaned and complained as the springs struggled to support his weight. As he made himself comfortable, Nick decided to address the elephant in the room. "Why are you wrapped up like that?" "Molting," Evan said. "I'm sorry, did you say molting?" Nick asked. "Is that the word you used?" "Yes, officer." Evan let out a hand from his pile of blankets. A thin, stick-like arm as black as tar with 4 fingers. It could be misconstrued as a strange glove, but it was much too thin for a man of his stature. He asked to borrow a phone and Nick handed over his. He never told Evan the password, but he still managed to unlock it. A couple of confident taps later, and Evan brought up a map. He pointed to an area next to the highway outside of town. "They are looking for my friend," he said. "They gather here. High ground." "You know how many there are? What they are?" "About a dozen. They are hiders." "Hiders?" "They are stuck and cannot go home, so they hide and hunt." A long stick-like finger tapped at the screen. "They will leave. My friend is not here." We didn't get a lot more out of him. Evan wandered off back into the cellar, and we didn't want to push our luck. I was getting chills just being near him, and Nick had been uncharacteristically quiet for some time. The moment the large man retreated downstairs, we got back to our patrol vehicle. Nick was breathing heavily. "You okay?" I asked. "It's dumb," he said. "I'm fine." "What is it?" Nick rolled his eyes, pointing back at the old house. "He smells like And going back to the station, we told the sheriff about the guy that we had met and the conversation that we had had. It seemed to make sense to him, and the rest of the search was called off. Nick was to sleep at the station for now. If these things hunted him for food or whatever they were doing, there was no safer place to be. Then we just had to wait and hope that they would leave willingly. A couple of days would pass, and during an evening shift, we got a call about a serious car crash. The details were gruesome. One man was not only dead, but decapitated. One child, seemingly unharmed, was to be taken in by the CPS. We only got the information third hand and weren't the first responders on site. We could tell that it was important though. Even the sheriff was up in arms about it. The kid was apparently named Fred. Patrols were asked to check the nearby area to make sure that there was no one else hurt. The road was just covered with woodland in all directions, so if somebody else had survived the crash, they could be anywhere. Nick and I checked the adjoining southern roads, only dirt paths leading westward. They were rarely used, but if somebody had run south from the crash site, that's where they would end up. Driving out there as the sun was setting, I felt this constant sense of unease. My stomach was flaring up over and over, to the point where I was digging my fingers into the steering wheel. Nick must have noticed my white-knuckle driving and turned on the radio. "What's up with you?" he asked. "I don't know, it feels off." "All right," he said, adjusting his sunglasses. "You got any idea why?" It feels like a warning, like something's up." "I don't see anything," Nick said, looking out the window. "But I trust you." "You do?" "I mean, yeah," he shrugged. "Don't see a reason not to." Nick shone a light out the passenger side window as we slowly cruised down the dirt path. Suddenly, he tapped me on the shoulder. Stop, stop, stop," he said, "right there." I stepped on the brakes and he was out in a second. Putting the car in park, I rushed after him. We jogged a couple of seconds only to see a man passed out in a ditch. He must have taken a tumble down a nearby hill, scratching himself in the underbrush. In getting a closer look, Nick gasped. It was the younger Digman kid, Perry. He was in his 20s but had the face of a teenager. But as we saw him, he might as well have been 50. He looked awful. It was clear he had been in an accident and he was bleeding from various cuts and bruises. His breathing was steady, but his shortness of breath told another story. He must have collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss. We did a couple of basic checks. There was no need for CPR, so we figured we'd just call it in. But as soon as Nick put his hand on the radio, I stopped him. It wasn't a conscious decision, but that second of silence had saved us. "What are you? Listen." There were movements in the trees around us. Clicking, buzzing, a strange barking noise like a large excited dog. only wrong somehow. "Don't make a sound," I whispered. "Not a sound." Nick clicked off his radio. We turned off our flashlights. We looked at the tree line, listening for movement. Something jumped from one pine tree to another. Something buzzed overhead. And then something collapsed on top of our patrol vehicle. The thing must have weighed over 600 pounds. Over 7 feet tall, this thing was a whirlwind of elongated limbs, tendrils, and exoskeleton. It bent the roof of the patrol vehicle inward as a long arm reached inside. My first thought was that it could smell us. Another joined in. They literally tore our car apart, flipping it on its side. The passenger seat was tossed across the road like it was a wet paper napkin. With strength like that, they could rip a human arm out of its socket in a heartbeat. We barely saw them in the dark. In the shadow of the patrol vehicle, they were just silhouettes, like moss crawling on a dying light bulb. With the car demolished, they spread out. The barking noise was some kind of thing that they used to smell. I figured it was only a matter of time before they found us, but there was nothing that we could do. Running would be useless, these things could fly. "We can split up," Nick suggested with a whisper. "Trick 'em. And leave the kid," I whispered back. Something brushed against a tree no more than 20 feet away. A twig snapped. "I've seen these," Nick whispered. "Back in Juniper, but smaller." I hushed him and he hushed me back. "Listen, they could smell sore. The thing you got, it's like catnip." So that's it," he said. "We spend time together. I smell like you, so they follow us." It made sense. I had lived with Nick during the time that we stayed up for 72 hours. If they were drawn to sore infected people, they would tear that place apart looking for him and me. It also explained my regular unease. They had been spying on my place too. They must have noticed that harassing Nick caused me to come out to check on him, allowing them to spy on the both of us at the same time. They were clever. "So it is me," I whispered. Probably. You sure?" "No." It was good enough for me. I got out of the ditch and turned on my flashlight. I turned my radio back on, turned off the safety on my handgun, and I took aim. "The dispatch, I found a victim of the single vehicle collision off 24th. We're on." Nick tucked his arms under the unconscious Digman kid, dragging him away. The shadows gathered around me. Leather-like skin reflected off my flashlight as they ducked and weaved to surround me. I took a shot at one of them, causing it to buzz away with enormous force, kicking up a dust cloud as gravel spattered across the hood of our broken car. A dirt road south westbound, heading towards the old scrapyard. "We require immediate medical assistance and additional units. Over." Releasing the radio, I spun around. Things in every direction. It felt like trying to push away water while standing in a lake. Something shot out in front of me, a tendril wrapping itself around my neck as a pink, beak-like mouth opened in front of me like a blossoming flower. Rows of teeth intermingled with black dot-like eyes, with numerous tendril-like tongues eagerly twitching my way. A claw raked my arm, ripping away my handgun. I yelped as the pain registered, and as I did, white strands shot out of my mouth. They burned the tendril, forcing it to let me go. I spat at the ground, taking my flashlight in my mouth as I picked up my gun with my left hand. This wasn't over. Not yet. They clicked and buzzed and barked. They were excited. The smell was exhilarating to them. In the distance, I could see Nick leaving the Digman kid on the road and doubling back to help me. I spat out my flashlight. "Stay back," I yelled at Nick. "Go!" Of course, Nick didn't listen. He unloaded an entire mag on these things. They were taking some real damage, leaping away from me, but there were just too many. As our ammunition ran dry, the circle closed around me. A couple of them broke away to deal with Nick. I remember throwing my handgun at them. I wasn't going to go down without a fight, no matter how much it hurt. I felt so helpless, limbs reaching out of the dark to pull me away. A hulking monstrosity looming over my friend Nick just further down the road. They would all get what they were looking for, and there was nothing that I could do. Predator and prey, the most primal instinctive fear. The dawning realization that you are outmatched, and that the tools you've been given were not meant for fighting but for fleeing. A talon grabbed my neck, pushing me to the ground. Scratches against my back as if trying to understand if my clothes were skin or shell. Barking as hot air tickled my bleeding arm. They sniffed me. Something big bent down, and seconds later there was this immense pain coming from the back of my head. It tore out a thumb-sized chunk of my hair, eating it and savoring it. And then they stopped. Maybe they had just listened, but they stopped. There was a whistling noise and then another click. Movement. Fast movement. One of them was right in front of me. In less than a second, it was flung into the air, brought down, and it had its head torn from its shoulders. They immediately scattered, but not fast enough. Something large, dressed in what looked like a sun-tanned plastic cover, like a makeshift raincoat, tore through them like a rabid animal. It was like watching a hornet take on a colony of termites. It was fast, brutal, and absolutely visceral. These things screamed like stuck pigs as wings were torn, mandibles broken, thoraxes caved in, and viscera spilled. I saw one of them trying to crawl, only to be cut into 2 pieces and kicked off the road. And then as soon as it had begun, it stopped. My flashlight had been crushed in the struggle, so I only saw the vague outline of a multi-limbed thing leaning over me. There was a flash of something metallic, perhaps a machete or a spade, maybe several. Up. It was a strange but familiar voice. Evan. I got up, feeling my scalp burn. Get him out, Evan said. I will hunt. What the hell? I could barely form a coherent thought. Something wet patted me on the shoulder, leaving a viscera-stained mark. Good luck. And with that, he was gone. Every now and then I would hear screaming out in the wilds, but it was distant and far between. By the time that I joined Nick, the kid was waking up. Nick forced me to sit down and take it easy. Reinforcements would be there momentarily. He checked the kid out. You know your name? He asked. Your date of birth? The kid couldn't focus. His head kept rolling back and forth. It was hard to tell if he was concussed, anemic, or dehydrated. Maybe all 3. I'm Perry, he finally said. All right, good, we're getting somewhere. You know what happened tonight? I'm walking, he muttered. I'm walking all year. It didn't take long for more patrol vehicles to arrive. EMTs took the kid in, and we were expected to debrief with the sheriff, but only Nick was asked to go. I had to stay behind, watching the many flashing lights fill the road. It took 4 guys to flip our car back, and when they did, it collapsed. 2 doors fell off in one of the wheels. Those things had mangled it beyond recognition. I got it from here. Hank Dudley was the last person that I expected to see there. Hatchet Pharmaceuticals had nothing to do out here, but here he was. He had put on a white jacket with a blue sunflower logo and kneeled down in front of me. You had a really rough night, huh? Yeah, I said. I did. I'm gonna have the EMTs check you out, but then you're coming with me. Excuse me? It's not a question, miss. It's what's gonna happen. I just looked at him baffled. He said it so matter-of-factly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He gave me a comforting smile. Miss, we've had your house, phone, car, wallet, and radio bugged for weeks. You don't think we know what's going on? You what? You got a somehow stable sore infection. You got it from Adam Salinger. That's very important to us. I'm not working with you. I'm an officer of the law. No, you're expendable, Hank said, and it's already settled. He leaned in closer, looking me in the eye, and his smile faded. You really thought you could hide this from us? He asked. What was your plan? You can't do shit, I said. Miss, I already have. It's done, and you're going away. He put a hand on my shoulder, but I shrugged it off. So instead, he grabbed the collar of my shirt. I could shoot you and have you dissected, he continued, but I much prefer to hear you cry. I slapped him. Didn't matter that I was bleeding from my arm. I slapped him anyway. He got up and backed away, laughing at the top of his lungs. I'll give you that one, he laughed. Sorry, I got cocky. He looked to his sides. Men with white shirts, black ties, and blue sunflower logos. Take her in. I got a black hood wrapped around my head, zip strips across my wrists. I kicked and squirmed, but it was useless. Somewhere off in the background, I could hear Nick screaming frantically at them to let me go, but it was too late. I was dragged off and put into a soundproof vehicle, and I'd be gone for a long time. I wish I could give you more detail. I wish I could give myself more detail. But what happened was that they draped a black hood over my head, and that was that. I was to be taken somewhere and nobody would tell me anything. And why would they? I didn't need to know where I was taken or why. They had their own agenda. There was a bumpy car ride, the sound of sliding metal and an elevator. Firm hands gripped my arms to the point where they bruised. Apart from the occasional go, there were no words. The elevator had gone down, so I guessed I was somewhere underground. When the hood came off, I was in a brightly lit concrete room. There was a simple bed, a toilet, a sink, and a metal door. There were no indicators as to where I was. No clocks and no phones. The only thing to keep my mind busy were a couple of magazines next to the sink. They were mostly about things like fishing and camping, from the turn of the millennium. Time passes differently in a place like that. You start to imagine things and you lose track of yourself. From the point where you go to sleep to when you wake up, everything looks the same. It's like no time has passed at all. You start to doubt yourself. Did you sleep for 6 hours or 10 minutes? Has it been 5 minutes since your last drink of water or 2 hours? At times, there would be commotion outside. People grunting and struggling with something. They would swear or scream. You got used to it after a while. It must have been 3 or 4 days before I got to see another person. By that time, I had read through every magazine dozens of times, counting how many times each letter showed up. I had counted every ceramic tile on the floor, the walls, the ceiling. I was desperate. It was a stranger that opened the door. She looked nice enough. A tall woman in her 50s with combed back hair, like she was fresh out of the shower. "You're not gonna cause me trouble, are you?" she asked. "Well, should I?" "I wouldn't advise it. I'm just here to check on you." I didn't fight her. There were plenty of guards outside. I would just put myself in a world of pain. Instead, as she checked my pulse, shone a light in my eyes and asked to check my throat. She had these thick gloves and a pair of protective goggles, possibly to make sure that I wouldn't accidentally infect her with sore. "I can't believe that it's stable," she said. "I've never seen that." "But you've seen it unstable." "Oh, several times. This type of affliction is more common than you think." She put together a couple of pills in a small cup and handed it to me. I didn't take them. "It's just vitamins," she said. "See?" She downed one of them without a drink of water, like a lunatic. I decided that for now I would trust her. She seemed harmless enough. As she was about to leave, I panicked a little. I didn't want to be stuck in that room for more time than necessary, and I was practically climbing the walls at that point. I followed her to the door and watched the guard outside tense up with his taser. "Please," I said. "I'm going crazy in here." "Sorry about that," she sighed. "Most people in your condition aren't as mentally stimulated." "Are there others like me down here?" "Oh, a handful," she said. "Most of them just sit there or stand in the corner. So I suppose none of them are really like you." "Miss, I'll go crazy in here. You gotta do something. I'm not like them." She looked me up and down. There was a sort of sympathy there for sure. She was hesitant. Dudley brought you in, right? She asked. Yeah, I nodded. I don't even know what you want from me. Well, we're gonna do some tests. We're going to see what the difference between you and the other infected are. Well, for how long? What's gonna happen to me? She opened her mouth to say something, but changed her mind. She gave me a pat on the shoulder. You have to understand, she said. Most people who come here don't leave. They can't. You're something new, and I don't think anyone has figured out how to deal with that yet. Hey, listen, I'll play ball, I said. Just don't stick me in here like an animal. Fair enough. I agreed to do some preliminary tests. I was taken to an examination room where the lady collected basic samples: blood, saliva, urine. She also checked my ears and feet. It wasn't all that uncommon for those infected by SOAR to have very dark nails, apparently. She already knew my name, but she introduced herself as Allie. She had been with Hatchet for over 12 years, and before that she had been a professor at UC Berkeley. I didn't have to tell her a lot about myself. She had read the files. What I don't understand is how all this happened in the first place, she said. SOAR doesn't just stop on its own. You must have done something. I met this woman out by St. Gall, I said. Had a blue caftan. After speaking to her, I was just fine. Oh, I'd love to meet her, Allie said. But I suspect that whoever that was wouldn't be all too eager to work with us. I had a couple of x-rays taken, and then she emerged with a massive syringe. Seeing my reaction, she put it away. We'll take the bone marrow some other day, she said. But I'm afraid that's all for today. Please don't put me back in there, I said. It messes with my head. How about this? I asked the guards to turn the lights off at 9 p.m., and I get you a couple of books to read. Would that help? I shrugged. It would help, but it still wasn't an enticing thought. And we'll talk again tomorrow, she added. Deal? Sure, yeah, deal. For the next few days, Allie tried to make sure that I was comfortable as possible. Lights out at night, books to read, and she came by at least once per day. Mostly just to get a couple of samples or to talk about the results. For example, the iron value in my blood was a lot lower than it ought to be, so I had to take some extra pills for that. And days would pass, maybe weeks, and the only people that I would see were Allie and the guards, and Allie was the only one talking to me. And we developed a sort of quasi-friendship, where she would get me out of my cell and I would provide her with answers. And sometimes we would just sit and talk for a while. She would tell me about her sons back in California, about her messy divorce a year or so back. It was nice to hear something so ordinary. And then there was that one day when she wanted to show me why they were doing this to begin with, to give some context. We wandered around the other cells. There were about a half a dozen in total. There were more rooms, but most were empty. We can't go in without full hazard gear, she said. They may look calm, but if we provoke them, it can set them off. She walked up to a door and opened a small hatch, protected with plexiglass. There was a middle-aged man in there lying on his bed. There was something coming out of his mouth. Little white strands. That looks harmless enough, I said. Is it really that bad? Allie knocked on the door once. The man shot out of bed and threw himself at the door with reckless abandon. He had this long wound across his neck where more white strands protruded, and now that he was provoked, I could see more coming out of his nose, ears, and eyes, just like what had happened to me. As some people change more and some less, she explained. Long before my time, they tried experimenting with specific dosages in volunteers to see if the transformation could be steered. Well, could it? And not really, she sighed. But boy, could it do some terrible things. The man pressed his face against the plexiglass. The white strands poked and prodded at the edges, trying to find a way through. Allie didn't back down. And most people already have a minuscule amount of the catalyst in their system, she explained, sort of like microplastics. What is it? I asked. I think the layman's term for it is blameless. A stupid name, but it seems pretty ingrained by now. But there was a Danish-American philosopher that had another name for it. She closed the hatch and looked me straight in the eye, maybe just for a factor to drive a point home. He called it the soul, she said. He claimed that this material was what gave our ancestors that first ability to speak, to think, and to reason. I was shown a handful of other patients. I didn't think all that much of it until I saw a young woman. She had this black, pixie-cut hair. I just blurted out my thoughts. I had gotten so used to talking to Allie that I didn't consider what I was saying. Elizabeth, I said. Salinger, right? You two know each other. In a way, I know her dad. Oh, he's been looking for her, she said. It's horrible, really. She had a very gruesome infection. Allie looked through the hatch. Elizabeth was just standing there, drooling on the floor. There are certain creatures that feed on this catalyst, she explained, but most people have very little of it. So what they do is they plant like a seed, and over time it blossoms into, well, this. She pointed at the hatch. Once we're well and ripe, they usually come back to harvest us, like wheat. When you say creature, you mean? Allie closed the hatch and turned to me. She leaned back against the door with her arms folded. I mean creatures, unnatural things, things that slip between the cracks from other places and end up here. Things from places that you and I can't even imagine. Being taken back to my cell, I pondered this revelation. I wasn't inclined to believe the word of a Danish-American philosopher, but I had read about similar theories. Stoned ape theory, for example. There was a lot of talk about the evolution of man being instigated by a third party. Most of it was pseudo-scientific nonsense, though. Not that I read a lot of articles back then. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a noise. The guards were all back in their break room, so it couldn't be them. I listened closely, trying to figure out where it was coming from. I ended up leaning against the door. There was a voice on the other side.
Can you hear me?
It said. Barely.
I'm using the keypad, it said. It has a microphone. The volume don't go louder than this.
You're talking through a keypad.
If it's powered, I can use it,
the voice said.
Are you the cop? The one they brought in?
Yeah, I said. Who is this?
I'm someone who can get you out of this place. That sound interesting to you?
I'm listening. The voice explained that it was trying to gather some information about the facility and that with my help, it could probably break a couple of locks. We would start with something small just to try it out.
There's a lamp in your room. It's turned off, but it's still connected. I'm gonna cycle through these and you will tell me if it comes back on.
Sure. A couple of seconds later, the lamp blinked. Got it, I said. It's blinking.
Good. That means I can isolate your floor. Hold on.
There was a short pause and then a click. The door was open.
Just check it. Don't go out.
It was indeed unlocked. I peeked out at the empty hallway.
Yeah, we got some work to do, but I can get you out.
Why would you want to? I asked. Who is this?
I'm John Digman, and I need to get my nephew out of there.
From that point on, I would spend my day with Allie and the evening with John. We would speak through the keypad through the door. He would ask me to perform little tests. At one point, I was even asked to go into the hallway to check if we could get other doors unlocked. Turns out that we could. I was a bit hesitant about unlocking the door for the middle-aged man, but luckily he didn't hear it. But at that one moment when the lock clicked, I expected him to jump out of his bed and storm the door. I had never actually interacted with John Digman directly like this before. His capabilities were downright frightening. He was getting enough influence to completely control the floor, but if that's what it took for me to get out, hell, he could have it. He was an uncomfortable person to talk to say the least. There was something robotic about his voice and demeanor, and beyond it coming from the keypad. Still, I could understand the urgency. If his nephew was also stuck down here, he'd be eager to get him out. I remember one night when I lay awake and John was tampering with the HVAC system. I spoke out loud to the keypad. Your nephew is Perry Digman, right? I asked.
Yes,
We pulled him out of a ditch, you know. He was in bad shape.
I know. That's why I'm talking to you.
So this is my reward for helping you people.
In a way.
He sighed.
But you're also new enough not to be burdened with preconceptions.
Well, that's a nice way of calling somebody inexperienced.
That's not a bad thing.
There was a click at the door, another flicker of the light, and then a deep sigh from the keypad.
All right, I think we're ready. We act tomorrow during the guard change.
And how exactly do I get out of here? And won't they just grab me and put me back here?
There are no records of you ever being there. And when I'm done, they'll have bigger problems than you.
Oh, what are you going to do? There was no response. I waited for a full minute before I asked him again.
Tomorrow,
He said, ignoring the question.
guard change.
I was awfully anxious the next day. Allie came by to check on me again. We had been doing some more intricate tests for the past few days, and she had shown me the result of my x-ray. There really was something inside me. A large sprawl of thin lines emanating from a growth around my stomach lining. It was so prevalent on the x-ray that it was hard to differentiate from my nerves. It had spread all throughout my body. I couldn't help but to notice the little blue sunflower logo on that x-ray, a reminder that I was still under Hatchet's boot. I can't believe you're not suffering any severe effects from it, Allie said. Most people go through stages of pain, desperation, and then succumb to the infection. Yeah, I barely notice it, I said. Sometimes when I get stressed, I can feel it in my throat though. You know, you might have a key to something amazing here, Allie said. It's gonna take time, but I think what happened to you can be used to help others. You really think so? Allie bent down to look through a blood sample on a microscope. She trusted me enough to not even look at me. I could easily pick up a scalpel from a nearby table and kill her, but she knew that I wouldn't. I really do, she said. I really, really do. I wasn't sure what to do. Having talked to John, I got the impression that things were going to go down no matter what I said or did. What exactly he was going to do, well, I didn't know. Maybe I didn't want to know. That night, as the lights in my cell went off, I was wide awake. I was ready to go at a moment's notice. I didn't know what to make of John Digman, but he had proven time and time again to be more than capable. If he wanted to get someone out, he could. But exactly how, well, that part worried me. I was pacing back and forth in my room, not knowing what to expect. I felt a bit bad about Allie, truth be told. She had done her best to make my time there bearable. I had to remind myself that she and everybody else there were, for all intents and purposes, the enemy. It must have been near midnight when I heard that first noise. It came out of nowhere, an alarm spoken by a monotone digital voice.
Pressure alert.
It repeated over and over.
Pressure alert.
There were a series of popping sounds going down the hall. The lights turned on and off before shutting down completely. After a couple of seconds in the dark, a faint red glow emanated from the floor as the emergency lights came on. And then the door swung open. There were voices in the hallway, someone demanding a person to stop, somebody screaming at the top of their lungs, and somebody running down the hall as if chased by the devil. "John?" I said. "John, are you there?" There was no response. No matter how many times I asked, there was still nothing. And this was it. He was throwing the facility into chaos, and that was that. He never had the intention to help me specifically. I would have to make it out on my own. Walking out into the hallway, I could barely see a thing. There were pipes overhead that had burst wide open, spewing out steam into a thick mist. I could barely see anything. It all just looked like a blood-red fog. I stuck to the wall and tried to make it to the elevator. At times, I would hear somebody running nearby, but I couldn't see them. The thought hit me that all the people from the adjacent rooms were on the loose running wild. There was no telling what they might do. Maybe the sore infected would ignore me. I made it to a corner. I had my suspicions about where the elevator might be, so I continued to the right. I almost slipped in a small pool of still warm blood. I swallowed my unease and kept going, trying not to imagine what might have happened. A couple of feet later, there was a bloody handprint on the wall. By the angle of it, I got the impression that somebody had been dragged down the hallway. I almost missed the elevator. It was hard to see anything, and the elevator doors were painted to blend in with the wall. There was a numbered keypad, but I didn't know the code. I hoped against hope that Digman had disabled it, but after a couple of clicks, it was evident that he hadn't. "You don't want to use that." It was Allie. She had armed herself with a handgun. For a moment, I thought that she might use it on me, but instead she kept it at her side and kept looking around. "They got orders to shoot anything that goes up," she explained. "So if something happens, you're all just dead. We use the service tunnels in case of emergency." "Okay, so let's do that. Let's use the service tunnels." Allie didn't know what to say. She stepped a little closer and lowered her voice. "There's more than 6 subjects at the facility," she said. "Way more." "Well, how many?" We're talking close to 100. We were going to have to get to the basement level and exit through the service tunnel, wading through close to 100 sore infected people. Allie needed hazard gear to make sure that she wasn't infected, but there were people standing outside the laboratory. There was no way to get past them without a fight, and so we settled to move the other way. We could check the other floors. There was a silent agreement. I would help her and she would help me. We were on different sides of this deal, but we both understood what was at stake. I even sympathized with her a bit. Under different circumstances, we could have worked together. But being kidnapped and dragged to an unknown location by Hank Dudley was just something that I couldn't accept. Still, I couldn't help but feel a gnawing guilt about this. If I hadn't helped John Digman, none of this would have happened. Then again, it was on them too. If they hadn't taken me in, they would have been fine. We made it to the staircase and continued down. I couldn't see the bottom floor. I got the impression that even if the lights were fully functioning, it might be deep enough to still not see the bottom. We could hear echoing cries coming from levels below. After a couple of steps, there was a gunshot. Allie clutched her handgun like a teddy bear. "You ever used that thing?" I asked. "Never," she admitted. "I have." She stopped and thought about it and then nodded. She used a small key in her keychain to remove a little widget from the trigger and handed the gun to me. I made sure the safety was off. We continued to the next level. We wanted to go check for hazard gear, but there were too many people moving in the fog. It was impossible to tell if there were guards or not at a distance. Allie didn't want to risk it, so we kept going. We took a sharp right out of the staircase and onto one of the lower levels. It seemed to be a kind of administration floor, complete with a couple of cubicles and a conference room. There was no one there. "The facility is connected by an underground network of tunnels," she said. "They were originally bomb shelters." "As long as there's a way out," I said. "There should be, but I've never been there." She took a left into an office. Her own office, it seemed. She dug through the drawers of her desk, looking for something. "I've got backup gear," she said. "I just need the keys to a locker." and then she stopped. She stared at something in the middle of the desk. A black spot. Allie didn't know what to make of it, and then she started shaking her head. No, 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 how did they even... There was a click overhead. Sprinklers. It wasn't exactly water. It was more viscous, like thin jelly. It had this awful smell of ammonia and chlorine, and it coated the entire room in it, staining everything. It was the same substance that had covered my skin when I first got infected by Adam Salinger. Allie just looked at her hands, letting the keys slip between her fingers. There was no point in getting that hazmat suit anymore. She was already infected. For a moment, she just stood there as if considering every choice she had ever made that put her in this position. Allie looked at me more confused than scared, as if she couldn't understand it. "Come on," I said. "Let's go." "No," she said. "No, it's too late." "You don't know that. You don't understand it. You don't come back from it," she said. "I'm done." Her fingers curled as she looked up. Her breathing grew forced. "It feels comforting, inviting," and she opened her mouth wide, drinking the black water. I grabbed her by the shoulder and dragged her back out into the hall. I pushed her up against an opposing wall, pointing directly at her face. "It's not done," I said. "We're getting out and you're showing me the way right now." She coughed and something slipped out between her lips. Allie shook her head as if trying to get rid of the intrusive thoughts. She nodded at me. Without another word, we kept going. We continued down another 2 levels until we got to an elevator. This was a lower level elevator not connected to the surface. It was probably meant to exclusively move things between floors rather than transport people in and out of the facility. Maybe it was meant to move subjects without the risk of them getting out. Allie stumbled into the elevator, trying to get the keypad to work. She pressed in 2 times but couldn't get it right. "My hands," she said. "I'm shaking too much." "Give me the code." She did, and I pressed it. The elevator rolled downward. The doors opened to a nightmare. It was a large cave-like opening, large enough for trucks to drive through. The ground was covered in the black water, and there were a lot of people out there, easily over 100. Not only subjects, but infected support staff, guards, and maintenance workers. There were even a couple of people with hazmat suits who had taken off the top to drink the black water coming from the sprinklers. Allie stepped back. No one was attacking us yet, but she didn't know what to make of it. Chances were that if we stepped out into that water, she would lose herself completely. "We'll stick to the walls," I whispered. "If we're already infected, they shouldn't attack us, right?" "It's not that simple," Allie said, coughing. "This is a sort of sore super predator. Small harvesters attacking other infected. There could be one out there." "It doesn't look like it," I said, "and we can't stay here." "To hell with it," she spat. "Let's go." We stuck to the walls as planned. We had to push our way past the infected. They were erratic and spontaneous. The slightest push could set them off. It was impossible to tell what they might do next. It was strange, though. They were all moving in the same direction, as if they knew something instinctively. Could they know of a way out, collectively? I held Allie's hand and dragged her with me, but she was slowing down. After a while, she stopped moving completely. I turned back to look at her, and she just stood there, covered head to toe in black water. White strands rolled out of her mouth. "Come on, Allie, come on," I said. She didn't move. I didn't see anything resembling recognition, or her understanding what I was saying. What remained of her attention had been shattered. Somebody to her right bumped into her, and Allie grabbed them by the neck. A maintenance worker. In a move that can only be described as practiced and intentional, she pulled the man close and pressed her neck against him. Seconds later, she pushed him away, pulling out what looked like a white blood clot. It sloshed onto her chest like a messy toddler's dinner before slurping back into an open hole in her neck. There was an energy in her eyes, a hunger, a level of control that she found in that one act. And with that intention, she locked eyes with me. She was a super predator. I ran like hell, and she followed me. All the while, she grabbed people along the way, tearing out their throats and eating their infection. She was much stronger than a normal person, and I could see her muscles bulge and tense, swelling to almost twice their original size. She didn't have to stop to continue her rampage, and maybe there was something about me that she found irresistible. I took a sharp left turn going into a side tunnel. It was hot as hell, the steam pipes had burst wide open, and there was no ventilation down there. It felt like breathing scalding water. What remained of Allie sprinted with complete abandon, smacking her arms against the hollow pipes as she kept going. She was gaining on me. I rounded a corner and there was a door to my right. It opened outward so that I could hide behind it. I had an idea and I hoped to God it would work. I swung the door open and hid behind it. From Allie's angle, it had looked like I had run into that room. If I could trick her, I would gain some time. I heard her coming around the corner, sniffing the air. She could smell me, but she wasn't sure where I had gone. Maybe the steam interfered. She went up to the door, poking her head against it. For a couple of seconds, she just stood there wheezing, like she was breathing through a whistling straw. And then she entered the room. I slammed the door shut, hoping that Allie didn't have the mental faculty to use the handle. Even if she did, I might earn enough time to get away. The moment that door clicked shut, Allie threw herself at it, making the hinges groan. How that thin woman could force that massive pressure under the door was beyond me. Those service tunnels were a labyrinth. There were no indicators of what led where, and you could barely see 10 feet ahead. If Allie didn't get me, the suffocating air would. My lungs ached as I pressed forward, moving randomly from one tunnel to the next. I could barely keep my eyes open, and after a while I just kept them shut. I could feel the scalding pipes on my left, so as long as I kept them to my left, I knew that I was going the right way. And then I tripped. There was a dead man in the way, and I had tripped over him. I hit the ground hard, knocking the air out of my lungs. There was a short moment where my vision blackened, as I rolled onto my back and wheezed for air. Looking down the hall where I came from, I could see someone coming around the corner. Allie had figured her way out and was still chasing me. I got a better view of her. She had this beer gut now and her arms seemed longer. I could barely see her face anymore, on account of all the white strands poking out of her head. She was making this howling wail sound like a grieving wolf. It pierced my ears, overpowering even the sound of puffing steam. There was no way that I could get up fast enough to get away. She would find me any second. I had to do something. I rolled over onto my stomach and I held my breath. I heard her coming my way, wailing with every step, and within seconds, she was standing over me. I think the dead body confused her. She couldn't understand if I was living or dead. She bent down and poked the back of my head with her white little strands as if to test me. One of the strands poked a hole in my skin as if to see if I would recoil. I bit down on my lip hard, hoping that she would just go away. I clutched the gun, getting ready. There was a hesitation, but I think she figured she'd give it a try. She rose up, bracing herself, but then stopped. I managed to keep calm enough not to roll over and start firing at her. There were sounds coming from the other end of the corridor, a more immediate target. It was better to chase living prey. She ran down the corridor, huffing with every step. She sounded heavier. I gasped for air and got up off the floor. I figured I might go back and start finding a way out through the main tunnels. There had been trucks there, so there had to be an entrance big enough for them to get through. Then again, being out with the other infected was dangerous. Not only might Allie find me again, but there was a large chance that Hatchet personnel had started to clear the floors by now. A thought struck me. A dumb thought, but a thought nonetheless. Allie might still be acting on some sort of instinctive desire, meaning that she might be looking for a way out. She was still freshly infected. There might be parts of her that still had a want of their own. Either way, the safest place for me would be behind the predator, not in front of it or to its side. So I followed her from afar. It was easy to follow her lead. There were so many bodies along the way, most of them with torn out throats or ripped open chests. I counted at least 13. I wandered around those tunnels for the better part of an hour, maybe 2. And finally, I stumbled upon a checkpoint. It had already been overrun and the doors were flung wide open. There were bloody spots on the numbered keypads, using the same 6-digit code that Allie had shown me. But the final door had been toppled right over. She had not even attempted to open it properly. When I finally made it outside, there was an eeriness to it. One moment I was standing in shrieking steam pipes and blaring alarms and red emergency lights. The next moment I was standing in a pine forest near an overgrown dirt road, from panic to serenity in 5 steps. Somewhere out there I could hear the echo of Allie's wailing cry. It was growing more distant, disappearing into the woods. But I wasn't alone. There were a handful of sore subjects out there wandering off into the woods. Most of them looked harmless enough, mindlessly wandering back and forth. I could see Elizabeth Salinger among them, the young woman with the black pixie haircut. She looked just like the rest of them. My thoughts drifted back to her father Adam. What do you want to see her like this? There was a tinge of regret in me. Maybe I could have helped these people if I had stayed. Maybe this could have all been avoided. I didn't even know who I was supposed to be angry at. Myself, John, or Hank. I heard gunfire in the distance. I was still holding on to Allie's gun. Some part of me had wanted to take her out mercifully, but there was no way to know if a bullet would have stopped her. Checking the magazine, I realized the gun was empty. Of course, Allie had never used it. She had just assumed it was loaded. I made my way into the woods in the opposite direction of Allie's wailing, and I hoped against hope that I would find my way back to civilization one way or another. Hey everyone, I just wanted to tell you all that I started a new podcast on Spotify. Mr. Creep's Scary Stories and Creepypastas. On it, I'll be posting daily stories from across my channels along with previous remastered stories, so you'll have a ton of content to listen to. The perks of having stories on Spotify is the ability to turn off your screen while listening and limited ads on the story. I'll have the link for the podcast in the top of the description. If you could, please go check it out and leave a 5-star review. That really helps with getting the stories out to more people. Thank you all so much, and I hope you enjoy today's story. You want to hear about the weirdest thing I ever seen in the ocean? Harvey, the old salt who lived at Neptune's Net, asked me one night. Buy me a sip of Cutty Sark and I'll tell you something only a handful of people have ever heard, and all of them are dead, he said, jabbing his finger for emphasis. His gravelly voice gave the ancient mariner a gravitas you wouldn't expect from a drunk at the end of the bar. I've heard your stories before, Harv, I said, taking a sip of my beer. No thanks. Oh, you heard me lie to tourists, sure, he said, leaning forward on his stool. But after the news I got today, well, I want to tell someone the truth for once. What happened today? The curious bartender asked as she cleaned a mug. Oh, don't feel the need to bring down the room. Just know that it ain't going away, he said, cradling his bottle of Bud. I want to get this story off my soul before Davy Jones comes a call-in. Harv was approaching 65, though he looked 10 years older. Years of working on the water and bending his elbow at beer halls had taken a toll on him. His hair and beard were all salt, no pepper. His green eyes had dulled with age. His pupils bore the telltale milky white growth of cataracts. The well-worn wrinkles of his bronzed face made him look like Jimmy Fox's mitt. His most dominating feature, though, was the ridgeline of white scar tissue that ran from his jaw to his forehead on the left side of his face. I'd heard him tell people all kinds of stories, and got it from a knife fight with an orangutan. Pirates in the Red Sea tortured him for fun. A sea demon jumped on deck and sliced him with a sharpened shell. The man told more whoppers than Burger King sold. Despite knowing all this, there was a sincerity in his eyes that I had never seen before. Granted, I wasn't at the bar all the time, but a glance at the bartender let me know that she was experiencing the same thing. She knew Harv, had heard all of his bullshit stories, but she had never seen the man this raw before. "A Cuddy Sark for Harv," I told her, but she had already poured the drink and handed it over. "Much obliged," he said, tipping his cap to me before taking a sip of the scotch. "Oh, love that burn, even after all these years." "What's on your mind?" I asked. He took another sip, letting his thoughts gather steam before he finally spoke. 30 years ago, I worked on a salvage ship called the Bottom Feeder. We ran out of San Diego, but our work took us all over the West Coast. We were a small crew, but we'd worked together for years. A well-oiled team. I loved the guys like they were family," he said, his voice breaking some. He took a sip of the Sark and recovered. "Some rich muckety-muck hired us to do a dive, but didn't want his name on the paperwork. Happened a lot in those Wild West days. The industry wasn't regulated like it is now." The bartender and I settled in for this epic. This is what he told us. "There were 4 of us on the Bottom Feeder. Me, Paul, Will, and Cappy. Paul and I were the youngest, and both still in our 20s. He was my drinking pal and wingman most nights. When we got paid, we went into port, and good lord, the times we'd have. Cappy, who would have been around my age, would call us a Tweedledee and Tweedledum, but he meant nothing by it. He thought of us as his grandkids. Will was the lead diver and the dad of the group. He was strict but firm. Knew his shit too. Been diving since he took his first steps. If I hadn't met his parents, I would swear that he was Poseidon's kid. Just understood the water and its many lurking dangers better than anyone alive. Anyway, the rich guy wanted us to retrieve some cargo that he had lost when his yacht sank off the coast of Baja California, and told the coasties and insurance that it had gone down in a storm. He was lucky to get away alive. That was the official story anyway. Truth was, the older rich man had married a pretty young wife, and as those relationships go, it broke up quicker than a wooden hull against a rocky shoal. The man, I think his name was Mort or Marty. Son's cooked my memory some. Anyway, the man confided in Cappy that his soon-to-be ex was a vindictive, money-obsessed gal that wanted to take him to the cleaners. To circumvent that, he concocted a plan to put his valuables in watertight barrels and sink them on his boat. I figured the ex wouldn't go looking for them if they were at the bottom of the Pacific. She'd happily take the insurance money and move on with the rest of her life. In case you don't know the score, kid, that's insurance fraud. Claim the things as lost, recover them in secret, and sell them on the black market. It's why the man wanted his name off the paperwork. You can judge us for being shady, and we were, but when they pay in cash up front, you put your morals on the back burner. Landlords don't take virtue as payment. Besides, the salvage world is smaller and more gossip-ridden than a sewing circle. You burn a client, they trash your name, and the work dries up. We weren't about to do that. And Cappy told the man we'd have no problem retrieving his things from the briny depths. Said the only complication would be the weather, but the outlook in the following week looked smooth, so we didn't anticipate any issues. The man told us that if we got his things to him by the week's end, he'd double the rate. Kid, let me tell ya, the best lubricant in the world ain't KY. It's cash on the table. We left that evening. As we neared the dive spot, Paul and I pulled out a bottle of cheap brandy and took turns passing it back and forth. We both hated the taste of it, but it had become a pre-dive tradition, for reasons that we had long forgotten. Will was in the room with us, but instead of imbibing, he was double-checking and triple-checking our gear. "What the hell is so valuable you sink a yacht to hide it?" Paul asked, taking a nip. I took the bottle from him and drank a drop or 2 or 12. Maybe he killed someone and wanted to hide the body. There's easier ways to hide a body, Will said. I tried handing him the bottle, but he passed. "How do you drink that shit before a dive?" "Puts hair on your chest," I said, cackling. "Wife likes me bald, thanks," Will said. "Cappy, what about you? Brandy fan?" The man entered and lit a smoke. "Aye, but not my favorite. More of an in-a-pinch booze, if you ask me. Mind your intake, boys, the waves might get choppy. Can't have you heaving up your breakfast on the deck." "What are we bringing up?" Paul asked, putting his cap on the bottle and stowing it. "Aye, glad you asked," Cappy said, waving us into the pilot room. We followed him like ducklings behind their mother. Laid out on the table in front of us were the blueprints for the yacht that we were heading toward. Cappy pointed at the map. "And gentlemen, this is the Allegro, 3-deck pleasure ship that measures 45 meters from toes to nose. 3 decks, sun, main, and lower. Our target is here," he said, pointing at a spacious location on the lower deck. "The ballroom." "Kinda small for a ballroom, no?" I asked. Cappy shrugged. "More of an entertaining space, I suppose. Anyway, the man has 4 waterproof barrels stuffed to the gills with his things. Said he'd like all 4, but it's important we get the container marked as Summer Song." "What the hell is Summer Song?" Paul asked. "It contains a very rare violin." "A violin? He sank his boat for a fiddle," Paul retorted. "No, he sunk it for a Stradivarius," Will said. "There are about 600 of these left in the world. That thing is worth millions, tens of millions, depending on the condition. Way more than his boat." "Well, that's why I only play a harmonica," Paul said, pulling it out of his pocket and giving us a quick trip up the scales. "I have dozens of them, and you can get them for a few bucks anywhere in the world. And yet you never think to buy a tune," Cappy said with a wink. We all laughed. And Paul quickly blew out an off-key opening to Camptown Races and nodded. "Doodah, sir. And now that the concert is over, let's talk logistics." And so we did. It was pretty straightforward. Will and I would be the team to head down into the ballroom. Paul would clear the path from the stairwell to the steel cables. All 3 of us would help attach the barrels, and Cappy would pull them up to the bottom feeder. If there are any complications, we surface and discuss. We don't go cowboy and try to solve the problem under the waves. When oxygen is limited, discussions happen topside. I won't haul out bodies because of someone's pride. Will said, eyeing Paul. Paul blew a cheerful note on his harmonica. "I'm not running point on this. I'm golden. No worries for me." You said that the last time," Will said, just reminding everyone before we get into the water. "I'm hearing ya, and I'm good. Promise," Paul said. "Same," I agreed. "I'll keep him in line if I have to." "Boys, if anything happens, we can't call the coasties. And this is an unsanctioned salvage mission. The man paid for privacy. If something bad happens, we're on our own. We get caught out here and that's the end of the company. End of our livelihoods, you understand?" We did. I can hear the wheels in your head spinning. That's a dumb thing to do, Harv, and it was. But we did it all the time and had never had a bump in the road. Plus, when you're in your 20s, you believe you're invincible. And young bucks don't concern themselves with shotguns until the hunters show up. A day later, we found ourselves at the coordinates, outside the rack on the peninsula's northern side. The seafloor depth in this area is all over the place because of plate tectonics. Some trenches can run 3,000 meters, while others are as shallow as 30. Our man had put down his boat near the more shallow areas, but that didn't mean it stayed there. We wouldn't know until we got into the drink. Jesus, we're looking at 50 meters, Paul said as we geared up. And that's deeper than most religions. Maybe we should say a prayer to Poseidon then. Up our odds some, I countered. Before I could respond, Will joined us. He looked at us both and shook his head. You boys ready for this one? Isn't gonna be a walk in the park. Why'd he put it so deep? Will shrugged. That kind of man who thinks sinking a multi-million-dollar violin in the water is already not making sound decisions. Who knows what he was thinking when he thought up this crazy scheme? And did he really think investigators would come out to the wreck looking for the stuff? Maybe. They can be pit bulls if your story sounds suspicious. Plus they probably do a ton of business with them. Take a loss on this yacht to secure the protection on the next. I nodded because there wasn't any more to add. Will was right. Will was often right. While Cappy was the North Star, Will was the sectant that we used to read the skies. I would have followed that man into hell in a gasoline suit if he told me we'd get through to the other side. After we geared up and went topside, we checked our oxygen tanks one last time. They were golden. Cappy was waiting for us in his usual spot, leaning against the gunwale having his traditional pre-dive cigarette. The white smoke curled over his head and was hard to see against the violently blue sky. You boys good to go? He asked, licking his fingers and snuffing at his smoke. We gave him a thumbs up. He nodded. And be safe, and be calm, and be swift, he said, giving us the sign of the cross as he blessed us with his own Holy Trinity. We all nodded back at him, muttered an amen to ourselves, and plunged into the water. And the distance we were going was about the limit of recreational scuba dives, but few divers ever go this deep. The farther you get into the blue, the colder and darker it becomes. Around 100 meters, it's impossible to see anything without lights. And we weren't going that deep, but we took lights anyway because diving into the bowels of a sunken ship is equivalent to being in a cave. Without any light, you're as good as dead. Lack of light is one of the many dangers that lurk in the deep. When you're nearly 6 atmospheres down and something catastrophic happens, it's curtains for ya. Best case, your corpse washes up on a beach and the crabs eat you. Your story becomes a cautionary tale to new divers about the dangers of carelessness. Worst case, you're lost to the waves, and no one on shore knows or cares what happened to you. As we dove, the familiar buildup of pressure in my ears and sinuses emerged. I popped them and got immediate relief. The next pressure change that hits your body, and a thing you can't just pop away, is the compression around your lungs. A hug that never ends. We were about 20 meters down when the deeper cold seeped through my suit. Like your lungs, you're aware of the chill, but there isn't anything that you can do. You don't even have to go down far before it's noticeable. Imagine walking into a restaurant's freezer, and you get the idea. While all these issues are concerns at the forefront of your mind, the worst thing that can happen to you is nitrogen narcosis. If you've ever been drunk and tried to order food on the phone, you know what feeling narked is like. Confusion, euphoria, sleepiness, and if you hang in the danger zone long enough, death. If you're narking, you need to get to safer depths as soon as humanly possible. Our job is to ignore these concerns and focus on the task at hand. They never leave your brain, but if you can compartmentalize them, it helps. I've seen beginners flip out underwater and it never ends well. If getting the bends is the best result, I'd wager you can figure out the worst. At about 45 meters, Will pointed down. Like a waving mirage in the desert, the Allegro came into view. It had landed right side up, its bow nestled against a few rocks. Looks like it had just followed the anchor all the way down and settled as if God himself had placed it there. It wasn't hard not to see the Divine and the Allegro's landing. About 10 feet from where the ship settled, you could see the jagged black line of a trench. It wasn't bottomless, but from where I was floating, I couldn't see the bottom. Another 10 feet and this thing would have been impossible to find without a submersible. The rich stay lucky. The boat was beautiful, even in the inky depths with schools of silverfish darting through it. White with blue trim and a sun deck made for day drinking and bad decisions with loose women. Random electric cables rose from its body like a sea anemone's stinging arms. As we approached, I prayed we were clownfish, immune to its dangerous touch. I looked over at Will, who nodded at the wreck and gave us a thumbs down. He wasn't judging the boat though. In the water, hand signals are among the few ways to relay messages between divers. Thumbs down meant to go lower, in this case into the boat. Thumbs up not surprisingly meant to rise. An OK sign means what you think it does, but a shaking OK sign implies something's wrong. The worst signal is a slash across the throat. It means you're out of air. The most prominent noise when you're underwater is your breathing. It's a good thing too. The steady rhythm of life. It reminds you to stay calm. You're a foreigner in this hostile world. Man may have conquered the land, but our dominion ends at the shore. It's healthy to keep that dynamic in your brain. We swam over the sun deck, looking for the stairwell that led into the bowels of the ship. There were still some chairs on the deck, but the currents had moved most of them, and they littered the seabed. If you stayed and looked down toward the engines, you'd occasionally see a black drop of oil seep out, its rainbow surface shimmering in the low light. The stairwell came into view, and Will and Paul flipped on their handheld spotlights. The sudden burst of light sent the fish darting away. If they had the capability of thought beyond get food, it's hard not to imagine they'd see us the same way people talk about UFO abductions. Will reached the stairs first, shining his light into the abyss. It's haunting in the spotlight. A gauzy photo reel but with globs of disbelief smeared across the lens. If the area around the sun deck was like dusk, everything on the main deck and lower was midnight. Black hole dark. We followed the beam of light down the narrow stairs. The wreck had shifted some of the furniture. The stairs remained mostly clear, but even a small obstruction can become a significant problem. When Will and I would go into the ballroom, it would be Paul's job to clear the path. We let him get to work and moved on. As we hit the landing for the main deck, something odd echoed off the surrounding walls. Music. There shouldn't be any noise down here. Yet the muted sounds of someone playing a violin found our ears. It couldn't be a radio. Historically, water and electronics are bitter enemies. But our ears told us a different story. Someone or something down on the lower decks was playing a classical violin piece. I'm sure the fish loved it. Will gave me a thumbs down. I nodded and we started our descent down the stairs. With each step we glided past, the music grew louder. I'm not a fan of the genre, but it was a pretty tune. Somber, which made sense. We were trapped in a wreck 6 stories deep in the world's vast pool of tears. Somber was the only kind of tune for a place like this. When we got onto the lower deck, the music stopped. The sudden disappearance of the music and the rushing return of your breathing nearly made the latter quit as well. Where had it gone? We were still trying to determine where it was coming from, for God's sake. It wasn't fair that we didn't even have time to discover that before it left. I glanced at Will, who shone his beam of light around the deck. Nothing was visible in here until the beam found it. His scans caught nothing but shadows and schools of small fish. No Jamaican crab conducting a sea creature band or anything incredible like that. Just the leftover remains of a slowly decaying wreck. Will nodded at the ballroom and swam toward it. 2 ornate, windowed French doors opened into an ample entertaining space. There were some tables and chairs in there, but from our vantage point, that's all that we could see through the glass. As we neared the doors, the music started again. Not the somber, wistful tune from earlier. This was aggressive, angry, a warning, a snake's rattle set to strings. I paused and gently touched Will's shoulder to stop him. I pointed at the room, made an okay sign, and started shaking. My streetwise gut told my book-smart brain that something in there didn't want us intruding. If I could have spoken with Will, I would have been able to plead my case better than just flapping my hands around. Since I couldn't and nothing looked out of place, Will disagreed. He nodded at the room and gave me an okay sign. He wanted to keep going. I shook my head no and gave a thumbs up. Let's go back topside and discuss. Will disagreed. He pointed at me and then raised his thumb before pointing at himself and pointing toward the room. The message was clear. He was going in, with or without me. I sighed, pointed at myself and then at the room. I'd go in with him. I'm not afraid to admit that I was scared, but I was more terrified of leaving a friend alone in the dark of a man-made cave 60 meters deep. He sensed I was apprehensive and reached out to pat my shoulder. I got you. Sometimes when you muck around in the remains of the dead, the slightest touch of humanity keeps you stable. The violin concert had gotten louder. I was sure even Paul could hear this from the main deck stairwell. The aggression of it was so pronounced that it even gave Will pause. The violins had reached a fever pitch that reminded me of the moment in Psycho when Norman Bates ripped away the shower curtain. Will opened the door to the ballroom, and the music stopped. He flashed his light in there, but we didn't see anyone, just the stillness of a lifeless ship. Will pushed the door all the way open and floated into the room. I hesitantly followed behind him. Outside the beam of light, it was pitch black. Like can't see your hand in front of your face black. You could see where the light died out, just stopped cold. Speaking of temperature, that room was notably colder than the other sections of the boat. With a wetsuit on, you can block out the chill of the water, but that wasn't happening. It seeped into my bones, my soul. Will passed the light toward the back corner of the ballroom, discovering 4 large barrels stacked in the corner. 2 had fallen over, but they were all sealed. The central standing barrel had the phrase, "Summer Song," stenciled across the front. That was the prize. From where we stood, it was in good condition. The client would be able to claim his multi-million-dollar prize without batting an eye. We floated over to them. The light beam bounced a bit as we kicked our way over, but the barrels stayed in the light the entire time. We were about 3 feet from them when I halted. I reached out and grabbed Will, nearly flipping him over. Between the 2 standing barrels was a pale face peeking out at us. I pointed, but Will didn't see it. I increased the urgency of my thrusting finger, but by the time that he located the spot that I had seen the face, it was gone. Behind us, a loud thump echoed throughout the room. The ballroom doors had closed. The sickening sound of a lock latching echoed through the ballroom. When you're this deep and something unusual happens, you can't panic. Despite how terrifying it might be, you can't afford to freak out. Taking huge breaths can cause lung damage or worse, deplete your air sooner than you wanted. If you panic and waste body energy, you're hurting your chances of having the kick you need to swim to safety. If you ascend too quickly, you get the bends, putting you and anybody you're diving with at risk. You cannot panic. But once you become trapped in a room darker than a Nazi's heart with a ghost hell-bent on terrifying you, not panicking requires the kind of concentration usually reserved for chess, grandmasters, and bomb squad members. I found my breathing quickened, and I did my best to center myself. I had been in hairy situations before, but this was rocketing up my list of bad times at record speed. Will turned the beam over to the door. As the beam hit the glass, a ghostly figure shuffled past the door. As fast as they were there, they disappeared. Will didn't hesitate. He swam back over to the ballroom door and tried to pull it open. It wouldn't budge. If the man was panicking, he didn't show it. I, however, was huffing air as if I'd never run out. My heart raced like a clipper ship, and every time I tried to relax, that haunted face appeared in my mind, pulling me back into panic's wake. I had been on hundreds of dives, but was acting like a scared honeymooner exploring a local reef. I swam over to Will and I grabbed the other door. He held up 3 fingers, and after the final one dropped, we both yanked. Again, no movement, not even an inch. I thought back to the blueprints but couldn't recall if there was another exit. The French doors were the only way in and out. Will looked into my eyes and patted my shoulder. He couldn't say anything, but I could hear his voice all the same. "Relax, kid, we've got this." It had the desired effect. My breathing slowed. Will shone the light into the other corners of the room, searching for another way out. I banged my fist against the doors. The thumps ricocheted through the boat. I hoped that Paul could hear it and come investigate. He wasn't supposed to leave his location, but Paul played fast and loose with the rules. I prayed he'd be willing to break them right now. Will explored the ballroom as I floated near the doors. I was alone in the dark with only my worst thoughts keeping me company. I couldn't shake the feeling that somebody was watching us. The beam hit me and I turned to Will. He had found something near the barrels and waved me over. As he did, the invisible violin played one long, uninterrupted note. It was so loud, and the fiddler was absolutely inside this room. A chill ran through my body. I wanted to get out of the water as soon as possible. My shoulders stiffened, and the sensation that someone was behind me flooded into my brain. Before I could turn around to check, something grabbed my oxygen tank and yanked me down. I hit the floor and the violin ceased. My flailing made Will swim back to me. I pulled myself back up as he got there, but he could see the fear in my eyes. I tried to relay what happened, and thankfully he got the gist of it. He shone his light behind me, and we both spotted a loose wire floating like an eel snaking through the waves. I smiled and relief washed over me. I must have gotten my tank caught on it. Will lowered the light back to the floor and found a woman's high heel. The red bottom was there by design, but in my haze, I swear that it was bloody. And before we could speculate about the shoe, a loud thud echoed behind us, followed by an ear-splitting screech as the hull of the boat ground against the rocks and dragged against the ground. While the thud before the movement was loud, it came from this room. There was no way that caused the boat to shift. The force needed to shift a yacht as monumental. Unless the barrel was full of nitroglycerin, it wasn't the cause. One more theory came to mind and filled me with terror. What if the Allegro had landed in a more precarious spot than we first thought? The blackness of the trench came to me and I shuddered. Were we inching toward a crevice? Will's light found the source of the initial thud. A third barrel had fallen, sending the other 2 rolling into the wall. I couldn't tell you what had caused it to move, but it did. To say that I was concerned about what was shoving heavy-ass barrels around in the dark would be a wild understatement. Another thud near us, this time by the doors. Will spun and flashed his light. Another face greeted us. Paul. Good unsubordinate Paul. He had heard my knocking and came down to us. Through an elaborate game of charades, we conveyed the door was stuck. Paul grabbed the handle and yanked the door hard. The door opened easily, so much so that Paul nearly drifted off into the darkness from the force of his pull. We swam out and gathered Paul. Will gave him a thumbs up and there wasn't an argument. We started our ascent, leaving all of the madness behind us. We moved through the main deck without incident. As soon as we got to the sun deck though, I glanced down at my oxygen gauge. It was almost empty. It shouldn't have been, The tank was full when we left, and I know that we had more than enough to do the entire task without changing tanks. There had been no telltale bubbles from a leak. It was as if the air had just disappeared. I glanced up and barely saw the underside of the bottom feeder above us. It'd be a decent swim, but I believed I could do it with what I had left in my tank. If not, I could share with Will and Paul until we breached the top. It wasn't ideal, but the other option was death. I had to try. I tapped Will on his shoulder, made an okay sign near my tank, and shook. Will nodded and relayed the information to Paul. We picked up our pace. When you're running low on breathable air, you don't really want to mess around, but our situation constrained us. Move too fast to get the bends. Move too slow, die from asphyxiation. A real damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. We broke through to the sun deck and kept going up, Will leading the way, followed by Paul and me trailing behind. I was just about to break free from the ship when my foot snagged on something. Initially thinking that it was a loose wire from the rack, I tried to quick it away, but then I felt the grip tighten. I glanced down and my blood damn near froze. The ghostly white hand wrapped itself around my ankle. Panic finally found me. My scream was muffled and garbled through my regulator. I tried kicking away, but the hand wouldn't let go. I readjusted to get a better look, but when I saw it, my brain went fuzzy. There wasn't a body attached to the hand. I mashed my heel against the fingers. They let go, but my flipper dislodged and floated back down to the deck. I could ascend again, but my body wasn't kicking into gear. My struggle caught Will and Paul's attention, and they came down to help me. They could see the fear in my eyes. And then my tank went empty. My speed, already limited, was now hindered by the lack of a flipper. I turned my eyes skyward toward the underside of my salvation. Without a second thought, Will removed his regulator and gave it to me. I took a few breaths and I handed it back. We buddy-breathed as we ascended to the bottom of the boat. My joints burned and the edges of my vision went black. The last thing I remember is seeing Cappy's waiting hands reaching for us. I woke up to the crew murmuring around me, caught the conversation in snippets. Will was confused. He didn't want to say that I had freaked out and that was the reason we were back up empty-handed, but he was tap dancing near that sentiment. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, my eyes fluttering open in the bright sunlight. "Jesus, kid, you alright?" Will asked. "What happened down there?" Cappy asked. "What happened to your tank?" "I don't know," I said, shielding my eyes from the sun. "It was full when we left. I double-checked it." "Yeah, I can back that up," Will said. "I checked beforehand, too. They were full. No indication of a leak either. We would have spotted it as soon as we got into the drink." "So how did it empty?" Maybe a broken gauge," Paul offered. "Shows fuller than it was." These are older tanks," Cappy said. "But what closed the door? What caused the boat to move?" "Currents," Will said, though he formed it more like a question. "A change in water pressure." "And then what caused the violin music?" I asked. Cappy turned to me confused. "Violin music?" "Well, you told him about the music, didn't you? And the person in the ballroom. You told him, right?" Will looked away. His face remained stoic, but his brain was trying to break the news to me that he had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't give him a chance. There was someone in the ballroom. A person." "What the hell?" Paul asked. "Yeah, they grabbed my leg as we left the sun deck," I said. "But it was just a hand." "Wait, a hand?" Cappy asked, not waiting for my response. He turned to Paul and Will. "You two see anything?" Uncomfortable silence followed. Paul finally broke it. "I was more concerned with him not dying." I didn't see anything either," Will said. "Sorry, kid." My head was already dizzy from the dive, but this kicked it into another gear. It felt dislodged from my body, floating above me. I finally found my voice. I know what I saw, but come on, we all heard the music, right? Will looked away again. Will, come on, you know what you heard, we all did. I didn't hear shit, Paul said. Yeah, you weren't in the ballroom, I quickly countered. I didn't hear anything either, kid. My stomach dropped. I shook my head, hoping an answer would come tumbling out, something to make them believe what had happened, but nothing emerged. Cappy let his heavy hand find my shoulder. Son, is it possible that you were narking? No, I said, pushing his hand off my shoulder and standing. My balance was still off and so I stumbled, but I was so angry that I wasn't going to let that stumble stop me. We heard violin music, I saw a person. Whatever's down there doesn't want us there. Kid, you know how that sounds, right? Will asked. Paul said what they were all thinking. Sounds like you were narking, man. I ignored him. Cappy, who played the violin? The man or his wife? Cappy paused. Well, the wife. But why would that matter? A lightning shot through my nervous system. I was onto something. What did the rich guy tell you, Cappy? Like, what exactly did he say? I told you. He was going through a divorce and wanted to hide his valuable items from his ex. Secured them, dropped the boat, and hired us to retrieve it. Why? Well, if they were just divorcing, why wouldn't she have her violin? Who gives their soon-to-be ex-husband possession of a multi-million-dollar instrument? If they're divorced, she would have it. It wouldn't be here. I mean, outside of the rich guy, nobody knows we're out here, right? What are you driving at? He said, lighting another cigarette. He lied to you. Cappy laughed. Why would he lie to me? He hired me to save his valuable stuff. Why would I care? He did, but I don't think he got divorced. I think he killed his wife and put her body somewhere on the boat, and that's why he sank it. What are you saying? Will asked, confused. Are you saying the ship is haunted? Paul asked. I nodded. His murdered wife is pissed off and taking it out on anybody that tries to steal her things. Silence. 10 long seconds of it. The water lapping against the side of the boat and the creaking of the swaying winch were the only sounds in the air. Finally, after a few, Cappy laughed. Oh, kid, come on now. I mean, it's a nice story, but you have no proof of... I saw her, I exploded. My anger was strengthening my weakened body. She touched me. We found a high heel down there. It was probably hers. Finding a high heel in the ballroom of a pleasure yacht is hardly proof that the owner killed his wife and hid the body on board, Will said. Hell, if we looked hard enough, we might find a whole stash of lady squirrel covers on board. Women attracted to yacht owners sleep with yacht owners. It's not rocket science, Paul added. Nobody believed me. Look, kid, Cappy started. No one's denying that the owner's a scumbag. Truthfully, you're probably right. But accusing the man of murder because you found a shoe, saying a sunken boat is haunted, can't stop a job based on these accusations. He paid half up front, and if we screw him over, he's exactly the kind of guy that'll come after us. If we don't finish this job, it could sink the company. I stood, my legs wobbly but resolve firm. If we go back in the water, something bad is gonna happen. Whatever is down there doesn't want us down there. Will and Cappy shared a look. The old man crossed to me, placed his hand on my shoulder and shook his head. And Paul and Will are going back down to finish the job. You're staying topside with me. No discussion. The decision is final. I looked past Cappy to Will and Paul. Both of them avoided eye contact. And they weren't going to vocalize it, but they agreed with Cappy's actions. I was pissed. You go back down and you'll die in there. Kid, Cappy said, his voice hard. Dude, we'll be okay, Paul said, trying to calm me down. I'm not thrilled about this either, but this is the right call. Few hours and we'll be back in port hitting on drunk moms. "Paul, don't go." "Enough," Cappy said, his voice rising. "Will," I pleaded. "Listen to Cap," he said. "He's forgotten more about the ocean than we'll ever learn. I wouldn't go in it if I weren't sure that I'd be fine." "There's something," I began, but a stern mug from Cappy ended any objection. I was hurt and I didn't know how to express myself then or now that I think about it. I punched the side of the bottom feeder. The pain rippled from my knuckles up to my shoulder. I went below deck to escape everyone. An hour later, after tending to both my physical and mental wounds, I moved back up to the deck. Cappy was staring down at the water. He saw me and pretended to be unconcerned. The small pile of cigarette butts at his feet told me otherwise. "Any word?" "No," he said. "They should have hooked the first barrel up to the cable by now." Maybe the barrels are heavier than they thought. Those stairs were narrow too. Hard to navigate through them." He said. "You don't believe that, do you?" "No," I said. He sighed and dropped another cigarette butt onto the pile. He turned his gaze to me and shook his head. "You good enough to go in?" I swallowed. Physically, outside of my throbbing hand, I was fine. Mentally, it was another thing altogether. But if Will and Paul needed my help, I'd have to go. Cappy nodded at me. "Get your gear and go find out what's going on. If anything," his voice caught. I'd never seen Cappy this broken up. It cut through my cynicism and hit my soul. If anything bad happened, don't be a hero. Come up and we'll call the coasties. Company be damned." And 10 minutes later, I splashed over the side of the boat and headed back down to the wreck. As soon as the Allegro came into view, my guts tensed. My breathing quickened, but I reined it back in. I was on a rescue mission this time. Lives were in the balance. I had to keep my wits about me. I reached the sun deck and the first stirrings of violin music started again. I swallowed, flipped on my flashlight, and made my way to the stairwell. With each foot I traveled, the violin music grew louder, more frantic. The tone flipped from somber to rage. When I finally got back down to the lower deck, my heart was racing. The violin bow was moving so fast across the strings that if we had been on dry land, it would have ignited. And that's when my eyes found something on the floor just outside the door. Something that shouldn't be there. Something that put an anchor in my stomach. 2 sets of scuba gear. My vision went blurry. I shook my head, hoping maybe I was narking and seeing something, but the gear was still there. The odds of them being alive down here were slim to none. If I pushed into that room, I'd find their bodies. A shrill shriek found my ears as the Allegro rocked back and forth again against the ocean floor. On the decks above me, loose items tipped over and landed with a dull thud that reverberated throughout the hull. The violin music stopped. As it did, something came pinging down the stairs. I spun around and flashed my light into the stairwell. A single red-bottomed high heel floated down. The unmistakable noise that had annoyed me for years found my ears. Paul's droning harmonica. I floated to the ballroom doors, peering through the glass. I nearly went blind as the entire room suddenly lit up in bright white light. I slammed my eyes shut. I could still see little white stars on the insides of my eyelids. The boat shifted again, metal grinding against the bedrock. I opened my eyes to a beautiful woman standing in the middle of the now illuminated ballroom, a violin tucked under her chin, a bow at the ready. She dragged it across the strings, but instead of violin tones, it emitted discordant, shrill harmonica notes. She locked eyes with me and grinned. The lights flickered off. When they came back on, she was gone. In her place were Will and Paul, stripped naked with their broken bodies in a heap and just like their gear had been. The lights flickered again and they were gone. The ballroom was empty now. I scanned the room for anyone, but I didn't see a soul. I noticed the barrels. The 4 had been ripped open and their contents scattered along the floor. Some photos and papers floated in the water. Any value gone. The lights flickered again. A 5th barrel stood alone in the middle of the room with the word toxic stenciled across it. The lid exploded off the top and landed near the ballroom doors, spinning like a coin on edge. That would have kept my attention if not for the woman rising like a cobra from the barrel. And gone was the beauty that had played the violin. In her place was the swollen, lumpy, broken body of somebody who had been in the water for weeks and crammed into a barrel with no concern other than that her body fit below the lid. And globs of jellied flesh broke from her face and hovered near her head. Saturn's rings, if they were made from discarded body parts. She smiled and her jaw fell off. She raised the Stradivarius up to her jawless head and played. As she moved her bloated body, more bits of her broke away. The music was reaching a fevered pitch. The boat groaned again as it shifted along the seafloor. More things on the decks above me fell over. It took me a second to realize the Allegro was listing now. Slightly, but it was tilting toward the trench. If it went under, I would join Will and Paul. As if I had summoned them, Paul's dead body floated past the window behind the ballroom doors. His throat had been ripped out. I could see into his stomach. He passed, and it was Will's turn to horrify me. His throat was gone too. Unlike Paul, his eyes had remained open. As he floated by the window, his head jerked toward me and he mouthed the word, "Leave." That was enough to get me moving. I turned and kicked with all my might. As I hit the stairwell, the ship moved again. I wasn't sure how much time I had before this thing went rolling into the trench. An explosion erupted behind me and I turned in time to see the ballroom doors blow off their hinges. The disintegrating woman came out, playing her fiddle with reckless abandon, mucking up the water with her putrefying parts. She turned her attention toward me and followed me toward the stairwell. I focused all my energy on swimming up the stairs. I passed the main deck in a hurry, the violin directly behind me. My muscles burned and my lungs ached, but I kept pushing my body. I hit the sun deck and that's when the ground beneath the boat cracked away, and the ship tumbled deeper into the water. The suction pulled on me. I kicked my legs until my joints were molten lava. I put every last ounce of strength into breaking away from the boat's descent. With my legs and arms screaming in pain and my oxygen dipping into dangerous levels, I broke free from the orbit. I glanced back and watched the Allegra tip over the edge and drop into the trench. The woman's now flesh-free skull stared up at me as the boat fell away. She raised her ghostly hand and let go of the violin and the bow. They flew at me at a speed I didn't think possible outside of a torpedo. The bow crashed into my mask, cracking it. I slammed my eyes shut and did my best to clear out any of the glass. The strings had sliced my face like the edge of a saber. Blood rushed out. The cold water stung the exposed nerves of my sliced skin. The pressure of the depth pushed against my eyes and I couldn't open them. I would have to swim up blind. I started kicking as hard as I could, pumping my arms like a windmill, propelling my fragile body back to the surface, to air. Every joint felt loose as I swam, like I was coming apart at the seams. My limbs tingled and went numb, but I pushed forward. My whole body was itchy. The bends were coming for me. I was ascending faster than I should, but it couldn't be helped. I needed to get out of the water. Forever. Finally, mercifully, I broke the surface of the water. My energy was gone. Cappy sprang into gear and helped pull my nearly drowned carcass out of the drink. He had a million questions, and all I could barely repeat was, "It took them. Who?" The violin surfaced right near the boat. $10 million floating an arm's length away, tantalizingly close. Cabby glanced at it, but I used the last bit of energy to shoot up my arms and grab him. It's cursed. The whole thing was cursed. The violin sank back below the waves. My message finally popped to Cappy's bubble. The old man stumbled back against the gunwale. I can't read minds, but I know when a man realizes that he's made a decision that sent others to their graves. He clutched at his chest and fell against the deck with a sickening thud. He was dead. Harv finished his drink and placed the glass down to emphasize Cappy's fall. Both the bartender and I were spellbound. I had leaned so close that 2 legs of the bar stool were off the ground. What happened after? I asked. Oh, called the coasties and told them that I needed help. Said we had gone out for a dive at a wreck and things went sideways. Because of the bodies, there was an official investigation, but Cappy didn't keep records, and nobody ever came asking about the Allegro. I was cleared of any wrongdoing. Didn't feel that way, but that's what the official paperwork said. Last time I went into the ocean. Jesus, Harv, the bartender said, pouring another drink for the man. On the house. Much obliged, he said. He glanced at me and smiled. He traced his scar with the tip of his finger. And that, my friends, that is the weirdest goddamn thing I've ever seen out in the water. I paused before my brain coughed up a useless, "Are you okay?" Harv laughed. No, kid, but ain't nothing that can be done about it. With one gulp, the man downed his drink and stood on unstable legs. I tried to help, but he waved me away. I didn't argue. That man had dealt with enough. Normally, you play your hand until you bust, and then you get to leave the table. Cappy, Will, and Paul all did. But me, I got lucky. I went bust and got to watch all the other sad ones lose everything for 40 more years. He looked away and shook his head. That should have been me. My luck. He nodded at the bartender, clapped me on the shoulder, and kept walking until he left the bar altogether. I turned to the bartender. You think he was telling the truth? The bartender nodded to where Harv had been sitting. Next to the $10 bill he had left as a tip was an old, beat-up harmonica. I picked it up. The name Paul was etched across the back. Goddamn, I said, handling the harmonica like a genuine religious artifact. Goddamn.